Welcome to my channel. Please like and subscribe for more stories like this. I, the younger brother of Superman, ended up with a Thanos template. 1 Chapter 1 My mother is Martha. The air was as fresh and clean as it was on the first day of creation. A gentle breeze, like the hand of God, softly caresses the golden wheat fields. On a cool autumn night, a red pickup truck slowly drove along a road outside Kansas. The endless wheat fields on both sides of the road echoed with the chirping of insects praising life, and fireflies danced leisurely like stars. The night sky above was filled with countless stars. The car radio played melodious music, and the familiar scent of the fields mingled with the fresh aroma of earth after the rain filled the car. Jonathan Kent, a new father, stretched his hand out the window, feeling the shape of the wind, a happy smile spreading across his face. Jonathan, this is a gift from God. His wife, Martha, had just given birth and left the hospital. Her face was still slightly pale, but looking at the cute and quiet baby in her arms, she looked at the most precious treasure in the world with deep and unyielding love in her eyes, and her voice was slightly hoarse but full of tenderness. I longed to have a child, and soon he was born as if he were an angel. A gift from God? My mother's name is Martha. Looking at his mother, David, now an infant, still couldn't believe what had happened, feeling a sense of helplessness. When I woke up, I had turned into a baby. In this life, the mother's name is Martha, and the father's name is Jonathan Kent. Not only that, but he was born in a hospital called Metropolitan Hospital, which means self-evidently that he was transported to the notoriously dark DC world and became the son of Superman's adoptive parents. Of course, this is God's promise, he will surely grow up healthy and strong. Looking at his wife through the rearview mirror, Jonathan smiled and started to speak, only halfway through his sentence. Rumble. A meteorite from the distant universe suddenly ripped through the night sky, its crimson flames illuminating half the heavens. Meteorites of all sizes rained down on the earth, sending dirt and rocks flying, some even heading towards the town behind them. At the center of the meteorite cluster, a meteorite fell, sweeping across the path like the finger of God, creating a chasm of fate that blocked the couple's way. My God! Jonathan slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the road and emitting a burnt smell. The car swerved sideways, narrowly avoiding falling into the ditch. He immediately turned around to look. Martha, are you and the baby all right? It's all right, Jonathan. As Martha braked, she immediately wrapped her arms around the child, and the baby in her arms was unharmed. The son of Krypton arrived on Earth as scheduled, accompanied by a meteorite. The earth trembled and roared. Despite the noise, the baby in her arms did not cry or fuss. She was quiet and adorable, with fair and delicate pink skin. She just blinked her bright eyes and peered out. Jonathan, look at our child, he's not afraid at all. Martha's eyes lit up with surprise. Such extraordinary performance, this child is truly a gift from God. Looking outside, David felt no fear, only anticipation. Host birth detected. Loading Thanos template. He recalled hearing an emotionless electronic voice in his ears when he was born. After his birth, David acquired the Thanos template and possessed the powerful Eternal's physique. However, only 30% was initially integrated. To accelerate the integration, emotional points are needed. Emotional points are accumulated by influencing the emotions of powerful or pivotal characters in the DC universe. He had already gained some emotional points from the couple. But the arrival of the son of Krypton is just the beginning. Through the car window, David's eyes gleamed, as if he were searching for a vast gold mine, peering out at the smoke and fumes. In the DC universe, who is more popular and more powerful than Superman? Furthermore, once the template is 100% integrated, the next template will be unlocked. What is that? Upon hearing his wife's voice, Jonathan did not turn his head. Instead, he squinted and was drawn to a hard, dark, blurry silhouette in the smoke. Martha, you and the child stay in the car and don't get out. Fearing danger, he solemnly instructed his wife before getting out of the car alone to check the situation. The meteorite's sparks still burn like tiny candle flames on the ground, illuminating the darkness. When Jonathan saw what was in the smoke and dust, his eyes widened and he froze on the spot. "Jonathan? Jonathan? What did you see?" Martha called out to her husband twice from inside the car, but he didn't answer. Worried, she got out of the car with the child in her arms and went to his side. She was immediately stunned. The plowing turned up the soil on the road, revealing a pitch-black spaceship, resembling a baby cradle and made of an unknown metal, about the size of a pickup truck cab, lying quietly at the end of the deep ditch. Inside the open, transparent hatch, sat an adorable baby with curly hair, bright blue eyes, energetically bouncing its little legs as it gazed at the couple with an innocent smile at this beautiful and unique world. "Martha, let's get out of here." Jonathan snapped out of his daze, hesitated for a moment, swallowed hard, and with a hint of urgency, took his wife and children and prepared to leave. Since ancient times, whenever people look up at the starry sky, they wonder if humanity is alone in the universe. Now the question has been answered, and the aliens actually look quite similar to humans. The officials will be here soon. This matter will definitely be kept strictly confidential, and I don't want us to get involved in this trouble. Leave. David was stunned, completely taken aback. By the way, Superman's adoptive parents adopted him because his wife Martha desperately wanted a child. Now we have a child, it's him. So does that mean Superman is going to be gone? What would Superman be like if he hadn't been taken in and raised by this incredibly kind couple? He was taken away by the military and turned into a superhuman experimental subject who hadn't seen the light of day for over a decade and was emaciated, as depicted in a certain comic book version. That won't do. Putting aside how many world-destroying crises were resolved by the grown-up Superman, where would he find such a large mind without Superman? No, perhaps God is especially kind to us, Jonathan. At that moment, looking at the adorable child inside the spaceship, Martha, a new mother, felt an impulse surge through her mind. Instinctively, she didn't want to leave the child there, and hesitated. He sent us more than one angel. Martha! Jonathan exclaimed in surprise. What do you think the officials will do to this child when they arrive? She wasn't unaware of the trouble involved. Kind-hearted Martha turned her head, her eyes filled with reluctance, wanting to persuade her husband. Page 2. They were kept in a cold, sterile laboratory, without parental care, toys, or love, and grew up amidst constant sampling experiments. Stop talking, Martha! Jonathan, torn and with a headache, covered his forehead. He shared his wife's kindness, but... Yet... Just as he was hesitating, David, who was in Martha's arms, stretched out a short, chubby, white arm from his swaddling clothes, waved at the Kryptonian child in the swaddling clothes, and laughed and babbled, seemingly very fond of him. See that, Jonathan? Martha's eyes lit up, her tone filled with surprise, as she had found another powerful argument to persuade her husband. Our child seems to really like him and is asking us to adopt him. 2 votes to 1. Seeing his son's reaction, Jonathan struggled for a moment, then feigned helplessness and raised his hand. Well, what else can I say? He gently kissed his wife, looked at his cute and lively son, then at the lonely baby in the space capsule, and sighed. 2 children, the farm will be busy next year. Chapter 2: A touch of Thanos' original flavor. Come down for breakfast, David. Martha, the mother, called out urgently from downstairs, you and Clark are going to be late for school. Immediately, mother. Golden sunlight streamed into the room through the window in the early morning. David, who had just finished washing up, responded and changed out of his pajamas. With short, jet black hair, deep-set features, and a tall, slender body, he exudes a clean and composed aura, reminiscent of a quietly standing ancient Greek sculpture. Pity. Standing in front of the mirror, David clenched his fist, his bones and muscles, stronger than high-density alloy, tensed and exerted force, a terrifying power comparable to a volcanic eruption surging within him. His skin quickly turned purple, and hard lines resembling the ravines of the earth appeared on his chin, adding an air of majesty. In the mirror, he seemed like a silent king gazing at the world. Thanos fusion template progress has been increasing, but if too much effort is put in, the skin color will still stand out. Template integration progress, 81%. I glanced at the progress, and once I stopped exerting force, the skin color gradually faded, so I put on my clothes. With a hint of helplessness on his face, he walked down the stairs. What is this? Only by retaining a trace of the original flavor can one know that it's a fusion of the Thanos template. However, at least he wasn't like Thanos, who was 2.67 meters tall, had beady eyes, and a bald head like a purple sweet potato. David touched the hair on his head, feeling a mix of emotions. That kind of hairstyle, typical of a strong person, was simply too much for him, a high school student. Ding! The crisp sound of the bread machine. The aroma of toasting bread wafted into the living room on the first floor. Da-da-da! David had just come downstairs when he heard light footsteps behind him. Good morning, David. Past his younger brother, the tall Clark with a pair of bright blue eyes entered the living room. Feeling a little thirsty, he casually opened the refrigerator, turned around, and asked, "Want a couple of sips of milk to perk yourself up?" As he spoke, he took out a large glass bottle of milk and took 2 sips from the bottle. David raised an eyebrow, walked to the dining table, and ignored his foolish older brother. "You can't drink like that, Clark." Mother Martha rushed over and snatched the cold milk from her hand. "Milk tastes better when it's fresh out of the refrigerator," the future Superman, who was currently just a 17 or 18-year-old youth, said with a smile, raising his hand. "Where is our family's upbringing, Clark?" Martha, who had just finished preparing breakfast, said with a headache. More than a decade has passed, and a few wrinkles have quietly crept onto the corners of this mother's eyes. "Sit down and eat breakfast, David, or you'll miss the school bus." "Good afternoon, you 2 sleepyheads." Jonathan, a rough man who had just finished feeding the cows on the farm, came into the house, took off his coat, which was covered in hay, and draped it over the sofa. He took the milk from his wife, took 2 sips quite naturally, and commented on his 2 newly raised sons. His movements were exactly the same as Clark's earlier. "Okay, I know where your manners went." Upon seeing this, Martha covered her forehead. "I remember after we got the new sofa, my mother told me to dust myself off outside after feeding the cows in the morning before coming inside, Father." David took the bottle from his father, poured himself a glass of milk, took a bite of the steaming bread, and said unhurriedly. There was some straw from an outer garment stuck to the living room sofa. "Next time, I'll definitely remember next time." Jonathan, who was used to being clumsy and rough, turned around and glanced at his wife with a slightly embarrassed expression. He pulled out a chair at the dining table, sat down, coughed twice, and said in a serious tone. "Actually, I think it was a mistake for us to choose this fabric sofa that is not easy to clean. You know, we live on a farm. In this Kent family, at least there's someone like me." Gentle Martha wasn't angry about the dirty sofa. She patted her youngest son's shoulder, who was speaking up for her, and raised an eyebrow at the 2 of them with satisfaction. Clark touched his forehead and covered his face. He couldn't deny that, having been born and raised on a farm, he, like his father, didn't pay much attention to the cleanliness of the house, while his younger brother David was more meticulous. Helplessness from Superman Clark +3. David didn't even lift his eyelids as the information stream scrolled past his eyes, and took another bite of bread. It must be said that it was because he grew up with Clark, who was a walking gold mine, that he was able to integrate the Thanos template so quickly and possess power that is unimaginable to ordinary people. In terms of timing, David was the one who arrived first for the Kents. However, before arriving on Earth, the Kryptonian child traveled through the universe for a period of time and appeared significantly larger than David, who was only a few days old. So the son of Krypton became the older brother, and David became the younger son. "What are you looking at, Clark?" Martha sat down and took a sip of milk. She saw her eldest son staring at a note while eating, seemingly lost in a beautiful dream, and a smile crept onto her lips. "Permission clause." Clark frantically tried to put the note away. "What kind of permission?" Father Jonathan paused in his hand as he picked up the jam knife, casting a glance at him. "The school rugby team will have tryouts this afternoon." David, who was in the same school and class as Clark, added casually. Even if he doesn't say it, his honest Kryptonian brother will tell the truth to his loving adoptive parents. "Clark?" Upon hearing that it was a rugby team selection, the atmosphere at the dinner table changed and suddenly fell silent, with only David still casually eating. The couple exchanged a glance, and Martha hesitated, as if she wanted to say something but then stopped herself. "What's wrong?" "Father, you used to play rugby on the school team too." Clark, who wanted to join the football team, suddenly sensed something was wrong and looked at his father, the head of the family. "But you're different, Clark. We all know that." Jonathan became somewhat serious, trying to soften his tone when speaking to his teenage son. After using a pickup truck to carry the spaceship and bring Clark home, the couple wondered if the baby they found was really an alien. "They look exactly like Earthlings, with no horns on their heads, no tails on their backs, and no strange skin color. You could lift a pickup truck with one hand when you were a kid." Until one day when Clark was 7 years old, he was repairing a car on the farm when the jack tilted to one side, and the car, which weighed more than a ton, was about to fall down. Page 3. Beside him, the young and innocent Clark displayed unimaginable strength, lifting the car as if it were a plastic dinosaur toy and moving it aside. However, Jonathan, who was so shocked that he stared wide-eyed, didn't see that his youngest son on the other side of the car reached out his hand even faster. Clark didn't notice either, because something weighing over a ton felt excessively light to the two of them. "On the court, I will try to conserve my energy." Looking into his parents' eyes, Clark earnestly promised to control his strength so as not to hurt anyone else, hoping to move his father. The charm of sports lies in the exhilarating competition with others and the ability to surpass oneself. At the dinner table, David suddenly feigned confusion. "I don't quite understand, my dear brother." American football, in particular, is a sport with intense physical contact, requiring players to carry the ball and run around the field. "What do you learn from joining the school football team?" Compared to the young son of Krypton, an Earthling's body is like glass that breaks at the slightest touch. On the court, he'll probably have to focus entirely on carefully controlling his strength. "Father, I promise I will be careful." Clark felt frustrated as his younger brother called him dear older brother repeatedly, but one sentence made his parents look suspicious. It must be because other families dote on their younger sons, while their family unusually cares more for their older son. His younger brother is always targeting him, claiming it's for his own good. "I know you will, but what if, what if something unexpected happens?" Because he had played football, Jonathan knew that the football field was full of running and collisions every moment. How can an elephant manage to bump into a kitten without hurting it while running wildly? As always, sensing the seriousness and determination hidden in his father's gentle words, Clark slumped in defeat. "It's always the same, the first thing they say is if, what if, suppose." How could he possibly refute that? "Father, I've had enough." The younger Clark felt increasingly frustrated, and his voice rose a few decibels in agitation. "I'm fed up with avoiding all activities and being able to sit quietly in a corner of the campus reading books. unable to do anything else. I could be more popular like everyone else. Thank you all for collecting and following my posts. I'm currently working on the plot and will start updating twice a day once I sign a contract. Chapter 3 17 Years Old and Fear. Clark suddenly revealed his long-suppressed feelings, and the couple were at a loss for words to comfort him. Son. This issue has been on the minds of this family for a long time. They hope their son can keep a low profile and don't want government officials to suddenly come and take him away one day. But teenagers crave attention on campus, and those who have been through this stage understand this feeling. I'm done eating and leaving first. The atmosphere at the dinner table was dull. David wasn't very interested in the old topic being discussed at home. He twitched his ears slightly, glanced out the window, and then, as if nothing had happened, got up, grabbed his school bag, and left. From Clark, excitement +9, depression +7. I gained another wave of emotional moments from my dear brother. Laugh. David had just strolled outside the farm. The school bus stopped right in front of him, exactly as he was told. Hi, David. As they boarded the school bus, the boys and girls inside chatted and laughed, their faces radiating the youth and energy of high school students. Several of them greeted David. I nodded in response and found a seat in the back row. David turned his head and leisurely gazed at the scenery outside the window. The sky was a clear, deep blue, with fluffy white clouds drifting by like cotton balls. The lush green meadow stretched as far as the eye could see, leading to a dense forest in the distance, bringing a sense of peace to the soul. The only advantage of Smallville, a rural town in Kansas, is that its remoteness and backwardness have allowed most of its natural scenery to be preserved, resulting in fresh air. The school bus made a brief stop before starting again. Where's Clark, David? A clear, lively female voice came from the other seat, tinged with a hint of confusion. Although the two brothers don't spend all their time together, neither of them is ever absent when they go to school in the morning. He's behind me. David knew who it was without even turning around, and said casually. Chloe has short blonde hair, fair skin, and her eyes always squint when she smiles, revealing her canine teeth. She is quirky yet cute, and loves to explore and discover all sorts of strange and interesting things. She is a reporter and editor-in-chief of the school newspaper. She sat in her seat, looking out over the Kent family's farm, wondering what had happened. It's not unusual for high school students in their adolescence to bicker with their parents. You won't be interested. David's tone was tinged with boredom. Here we go again. Don't always act like a grown-up, David. Upon hearing this, Pete, a short, somewhat comical-looking black man sitting next to Chloe, gave her a knowing look and smiled. This will make you seem out of place, and girls don't like this type. On campus, the Kent brothers were known for disliking all kinds of activities. Clark, on the other hand, appeared to be tall and strong but shy and reserved, not good at speaking, like an honest ox. In other people's impressions, David prefers to be alone and doesn't like to interact with others. His personality is somewhat aloof and mysterious. Looks like Clark won't make the school bus today. Chloe turned her head and jokingly replied. If you hadn't been born on a farm, the rumors at school that you were a vampire born in the Renaissance era and who usually spends his days alone in a castle would have spread long ago. David and Chloe were acquainted, mainly because they were among Clark's few close friends, and they got to know each other through chance encounters. Looking out the window, David remained noncommittal. Having lived a second life, even though my body is affected by various hormones and I still have some of the mindset I had during puberty, I am definitely different from the impulsive teenagers of my youth. For example, his Kryptonian brother Clark. Kryptonians also have adolescence. With a sigh, David turned his gaze to the front row of the school bus, where a couple in love were chatting and laughing intimately. Lana Lan has smooth black hair, a slightly upturned nose, and is pretty. She is the captain of the school's cheerleading team. Although she is not the hot and outgoing type, she is liked and secretly admired by countless men in the school. And her handsome blonde boyfriend. It's not surprising at all that the captain of the football team, who is as glamorous as a star, and the captain of the cheerleading team are dating. He thought to himself, what am I complaining about? Honestly, if Clark, who's shy even when talking to girls, could have snatched Lana from Whitney, that would be incredible. I'll have it as the headline in the next issue of the Torch Daily. Seeing David's gaze, Chloe chuckled, but we all know that's impossible. It's usually impossible to hide a crush on someone. Clark's crush on Lana was something that his friends, Pete and her, though they didn't say it, all noticed. After all, what could be the reason why a boy would often stare at a girl absent-mindedly, whether in class or not, and become extremely nervous and at a loss when talking to her? As family members who have grown up together for over a decade, David would support Clark if he truly loves football. Unfortunately, the young Superman was blinded by hormones. Clark wants to join football and play glass to glass, mainly because Lana's boyfriend Whitney is the captain of the football team. I want to emulate that, shine on the rugby field, and win the attention of my crush. So inexperienced. David shook his head inwardly. Looks like Clark's plan to join the football team is off, barring any unforeseen circumstances, right? Putting aside his smirk at Clark's pitiful crush, Pete became serious and glanced around before leaning closer and asking in a low voice. David, what about you? I've said it before, I don't plan to join the rugby team. He had absolutely no interest in carefully controlling his strength or playing house with the school's generally rude and arrogant football team members who were like gorillas. But this is the only way. A hint of fear flickered in Pete's eyes. What method? Chloe asked, puzzled. Pete, why are you suddenly speaking in such a low voice? As if they were thieves, they were hiding from something in fear. What are you talking about? Page 4. You're a girl, you don't understand, Chloe. Pete glanced furtively at the football team members playing around in front of him, and nervously swallowed, as if afraid they might turn around at any moment. We want to avoid becoming the hapless scarecrow. Scarecrow. It's a tradition of the school's football team. Before the big game, the team paints small Wells S on someone's chest and hangs him up like a scarecrow. David explained with a smile. It was like a morale-boosting ceremony before an army went to war. A group of young, reckless, and unscrupulous individuals. It seems I underestimated the brutality of rugby players. Chloe frowned, her expression indescribable. That's why Clark and I wanted to join the school team, even if it was just watching over the clothes and handing out water, they wouldn't mess with their own people, said Pete, a slightly shorter black man. He cast a look at David as if he wanted to remind and persuade him. You can still laugh, David. If Clark doesn't pass, the next target will likely be one of you two brothers. This is not just empty talk or scare tactics. That's how it is on American campuses. Students who excel in sports are the focus of attention on campus, while nerds, no matter how well they study, are still nerds and are more likely to be bullied. Two farm-born, academically gifted nerdy brothers are quite famous on campus. You know that. The Clark affair might make Whitney target you, Clark's brother. Stupid Clark. David secretly rolled his eyes when the topic came up. Clark thought he had hidden his crush on Lana very well, but anyone who had any contact with the two of them could see it, including Lana's boyfriend. Although the young Superman appears dull, shy, and taciturn to outsiders, making him the least popular type of guy, his tall, strong physique and handsome appearance still make him incredibly threatening. Especially since even though Lana has a boyfriend, her attitude towards Clark is subtly different from that towards others. With the risk of being cuckolded, it was hard for Whitney, who was used to being a star on campus, not to be consumed by jealousy. Meanwhile, Pete lowered his voice and tried to persuade David to join the football team. Whitney, while chatting with her girlfriend, either coincidentally or because she vaguely heard her own name. He glanced back as he talked and laughed, his gaze lingering on David for a moment, then turned back with undisguised coldness in his eyes. Are you really going to come looking for me? Seeing this, David raised an eyebrow and paused for a moment. Is he starting to feel scared now? At 17, with Thanos-like physique, am I afraid of violence from my classmates? Chapter 4 Clark, I'm too embarrassed to call you out. His parents still refused his request to join the rugby team selection. Clark walked out dejectedly with his backpack, glancing around as he went. The tire tracks on the dirt road in front of the farm were clearly visible, indicating that the school bus should be arriving at school soon. You can't show anything unusual in front of others, but as long as no one sees it, it's fine. Clark smirked, slung his backpack over his shoulder, and vanished in a flash, dashing into the endless cornfield at a speed faster than a bullet leaving the barrel, creating a powerful gust of wind. From the sky, the green waves were swiftly parted as if pointed by Moses' staff. Laugh. Aside from a brief chat between the school bus driver and someone whose car broke down along the way to ask if they needed help, which caused some delay, the journey was relatively short. The school bus drove smoothly all the way and stopped on time in front of the town's high school. Students disembarked from the school bus one after another and walked into the campus in twos and threes. After getting out of the car, David glanced at a sign in the distance with a meteorite pattern, weathered and faded from years of wear and tear. Welcome to Smallville, the world's meteorite capital. More than a decade ago, a meteor shower struck this small town, bringing both disaster and opportunity. The townspeople are trying to capitalize on the meteorite capital label to become a tourist hotspot and boost the town's economy. However, looking at the main road of the town, which can be crossed in just a few steps, and the low-rise buildings that are everywhere, it is not hard to know the result. David looked away, casually put his hands in his pockets, and walked towards the campus where it was springtime and the cherry blossoms were in bloom. The meteorite capital, Clark will have his share of trouble in the future. The so-called meteorite is actually the kryptonite that came to Earth with the spacecraft of the Kryptonian Sun. As we all know, kryptonite is Superman's fatal weakness. Once it comes into contact with him, the short-term effects are pain and weakness, and the long-term effects are death. A small green stone was enough to make a god of the mortal realm, whose power was enough to move continental plates, kneel helplessly on the ground. He noticed a bit more when he grew up that there was an unusually large amount of kryptonite in this town. To exaggerate a bit, you could probably kick out a couple of pieces while walking on the street. He believed that the various villains who would oppose Superman in the future would never have to worry about where to find kryptonite. Chloe and Pete got out of the car, and the two of them caught up with them. The three of them walked into the campus together. Hi, good morning, Chloe, Pete. Wearing jeans and a classic thick blue plaid shirt, Clark appeared out of nowhere, carrying a few books, trying to pretend he had arrived early, and greeted the two. Didn't David say you were behind me? Chloe's strange events radar activated, and she looked puzzled. Clark, who missed the school bus, arrived at school before them. I took a shortcut and set off a long time ago. David didn't see it. Clark recalled a remark David had made that morning that had jeopardized his plans. Even without David's reminder and with little chance of getting his parents' approval, he still angrily put his arm around David's shoulder and jokingly scolded his brother, whose face had become expressionless. You know, David has never really cared about me. Really? The two men's suspicions hadn't lessened at all, and they looked at David. They remembered that David had said that Clark had encountered some difficulties in getting his parents' permission to participate in the football team tryouts that morning, but he was still determined to try. Whatever. David slapped Clark's hand away and walked into the campus first. He began to consider whether he should pick out a small piece of the kryptonite he had collected and carry it with him, to prevent some Kryptonian son from lying about him again next time. Clark, who had just done something wrong, breathed a slight sigh of relief. David was well aware of his unusual traits as a family member he lived with day and night. Others may not know how he did it, but David certainly does. Fortunately, David didn't expose it as he had anticipated. In other words, his younger brother has always been very mature. Clark smiled as he watched his younger brother's retreating figure. Even though he discovered that his older brother was incredibly strong and faster than sound, while he himself was just an ordinary person, he never felt resentful. However, this anomaly doesn't offer much benefit. Thinking of this, his eyebrows drooped again. Hiss! Suddenly, Clark felt as if all his strength had been drained away. He felt weak and uncomfortable, lost his balance, and fell to the ground, scattering his books everywhere. Whitney walked by with his girlfriend Lana, casting a disdainful glance at them. When Lana saw him fall, she stopped to help him pick up the book, glanced at the book in her hand, and smiled. Thus spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche. Clark, do you see yourself as an ordinary person or Superman? Hearing the sound, David turned around and glanced back. His eyes swept over Lana's fair chest, where a green crystal necklace hung. I do not know. Turning his head away, unable to face the kryptonite necklace, Clark looked somewhat distressed and stammered. Page 5. The Superman that Lana mentioned was not referring to Clark's future hero code name. The philosopher Nietzsche once proposed a philosophy about the definition of a powerful human being, calling a person who is not bound by worldly rules and morality, who transcends himself and ordinary people, who has abundant creativity and a strong will, a Superman. Say kryptonite, kryptonite arrives. David sympathetically stroked his chin, temporarily abandoning his idea of carrying kryptonite with him in the future. The future Superman is already miserable enough. He can't even talk to his dream girl freely because of the kryptonite necklace. Every time his crush appears, it's usually when he's embarrassed. Let's go. Seeing his girlfriend talking to Clark, Whitney was filled with jealousy, but since he hadn't done anything in front of her, he kissed Lana, put his arm around his shy girlfriend, and left, leaving behind an embarrassed figure picking up the books from the ground. David. Footsteps approached, and Clark looked up to see David walking towards him. His eyes lit up, thinking his younger brother was going to help him pick up the books. How pathetic, Clark! David left after saying that. Clark was furious at his brother's deliberate return to mock him. After picking up their books, the four of them went into the building. In the corridor, by the lockers, men and women, their hormones raging, were chatting excitedly, trying their best to exude their charm and win over the opposite sex in front of them so that they would accept their invitations. Spring has arrived. Feeling the atmosphere of the school, David sighed. You mean the upcoming spring ball, David? Chloe blinked and asked, do you have a dance partner? David has never been interested in this kind of thing. Peter shrugged and invited, how about Chloe, you be my dance partner, just as friends. Having someone to keep you company will prevent you from feeling too awkward at the dance. Clark, what about you? The four chatted as they walked into the classroom. After a morning of studying, school ended at noon. David, cough, you're going home alone today. Clark told David to go home first, as if it were a serious matter. I'm going to the playground to accompany Pete to the selection process and to encourage him. Accompany Pete. David glanced at him up and down and sneered at his words. I'm too embarrassed to call you out, Clark. After saying this, he ignored Clark, who was blushing and trying to argue, put his hands in his pockets, turned around, and walked away with a flourish. Get on the school bus. David looked out the window at the scenery. Clark's excuse for wanting to see Pete participate in the selection was that he was smitten and used this as a pretext to watch Lana and her teammates practice cheerleading on the playground. To this, he could only comment, you brought this on yourself. The playground wasn't just filled with cheerleaders, there was also a football team, a veritable feast of love and jealousy, all waiting for Clark. Inside the school bus, Chloe sat beside her, quietly writing her manuscript while leaning on her backpack. The article, in keeping with her usual style sharp and incisive, was about the rugby team and was titled Rugby, Sport or Savagery, intended for publication in the school newspaper. On the bridge, there were few vehicles coming and going, and the school bus driver drove quickly and smoothly. Unaware that the car had broken down that morning on the asphalt road ahead, a broken steel part lay there. Gee! The school bus, which was driving smoothly, suddenly had its tire punctured and deflated. Bang! The car skidded out of control, and it was too late to swerve. The school bus crashed through the bridge railing and plunged off the bridge in the driver's terrified state. The school bus was flying in mid-air. What? Suddenly feeling weightless, their bodies were lifted off the ground, and everyone in the car screamed in alarm. David's expression changed. Before the group of high school students could finish screaming, the school bus plunged into the water, creating a huge splash. Godong dong! The heavy school bus, weighing over 10 tons, sank rapidly to the bottom of the water. The surging, icy river water rushed in through the gaps in the vehicle and submerged the knees almost instantly. Help! Help! The people on the school bus, ignoring their dizziness from the fall, quickly stood up, screaming in terror and banging on the windows. Chloe turned pale with fright and started screaming, even more terrified, as she couldn't swim. I don't want to die, someone please save me. An atmosphere of despair and terror spread rapidly through the car, and fear engulfed everyone. Tough luck. The water was up to his waist, and his clothes were soaked. David didn't seem to be facing a life-or-death crisis at all. He looked around and frowned. Chapter 5 Clark, did you save Luther? Swish! Time seemed to slow down. In an instant, the ripples inside the school bus, the unsteady girl's hair flying, the saliva spitting out of the boy's mouth as he screamed in fear, and the water cup floating on the surface of the water, everything seemed to slow down 100 times. David observed the situation and then calmly smashed the glass next to him. With a sweep of his arms, he arrived in front of the school bus as fast as a torpedo. The school bus had a high front, and the people inside were in a state of panic, so no one noticed him. While in the water, David did not hold his breath and appeared relaxed. Thanos' eternal physique allows him to survive in the vacuum of space at temperatures below -200 degrees Celsius without eating, drinking, or even breathing. Not to mention the bottom of the water. David placed his well-defined knuckles on the front of the car and pushed it aside with one hand, just like he would casually push away someone blocking his way. In the surging river, a school bus weighing over 10 tons, comparable to a medium-sized bus, was sent flying backward like a cannonball launched by explosive force, breaking through the water's surface and hurtling towards the shore with a deafening splash. Bang! The school bus traversed an arc over 10 meters long on the river surface, landing heavily on the grassy riverbank. Its heavy rubber tires splashed mud everywhere, and the impact of the landing sent the entire vehicle bouncing. The car windows were shattered, and shards flew everywhere. What? The passengers on the school bus were caught off guard and fell one after another, covering their heads in fear. What happened? After a while, the glass shards hit the ground, and everyone stood up in disbelief, looking outside. Just moments ago, I was at the bottom of a dark and turbulent river, my life hanging by a thread, but in the blink of an eye, I was on a sunny bank, listening to the vibrant and beautiful chirping of birds in the forest. Am we dreaming? They stared at each other, speechless. Oh, God! The school bus driver, a believer in God, pulled off his hat, looking shocked, and stared into the river as if trying to find the figure of some angel. Are you all right, Chloe? A voice came from beside her, and Chloe, who had survived the ordeal, turned her head to look, her face pale. David was soaked to the bone, just like her, but his expression was calm, and there was not a trace of fear on his deep-set face. Do all members of the Kent family have a big heart? No. It's okay. Having narrowly escaped death, Chloe was still reeling from what could only be described as a miracle, and stammered. Page 6. I thought the next time I would come into contact with light and air would be when heartbroken people would bring in a crane to retrieve the school bus full of our bodies from the bottom of the river. In the end, what happened? This was the question on everyone's mind on the school bus except for David, who saved them? Did God hear their cries? Let's get off the bus and leave this place, the school bus driver, who had just regained his senses, shouted. The riverbank is slippery. If the school bus were to slide into the river, it would be a fatal joke. Crash! With his clothes soaking wet and clinging to his body, David calmly wrung them out and left the school bus that had almost become their coffin with the other still shaken group. It looks like something knocked us out of the river. Staring in astonishment at the dented front of the bus, marked as if struck by an Asian elephant, the burly school bus driver gaped, unable to close his mouth for a long time. Is there a river monster? A group of students, still shaken, discussed the incident with great interest and surprise. Our school bus hit its head, and it threw us out. Looking at the surging river again, it felt as if a huge monster was lurking inside. David glanced at the marks he had left behind and casually looked away. Thanos, a mutant of the Eternals, possesses unimaginable strength and endurance, along with superhuman regenerative abilities and agility. His skin is nearly indestructible, especially when resisting cold, heat, electricity, radiation, poison, aging, and disease. Its physical strength surpasses even vibranium, and its terrifying power is enough to slay gods. Although only about 80% of the templates have been integrated so far. But he also didn't know the limits of his power. Pickup trucks, boulders, they all feel light as a feather. David estimated that he could easily catch an airplane falling from the sky like an adult Superman, pull a steel warship weighing thousands of tons, and lift a residential building of more than 10 stories. However, without an omnipotent biological force, those things would most likely crumble and disintegrate. The school bus driver's claim that something knocked the school bus out of the river was just a joke. When they were at the bottom of the river, David didn't even dare to push them too hard, for fear of causing them to meet God prematurely, lest they suffocate. The group moved away from the riverbank and sat aside, waiting for the rescuers and parents to arrive. The school bus plunged into the river once and was thrown ashore again. The violent recoil caused many people to fall and suffer injuries, including broken bones and head wounds. A school bus falling into a river and then being inexplicably knocked ashore by an unknown creature is undoubtedly an extremely bizarre event, enough to leave some biologists and scientists scratching their heads in bewilderment. But in this small town, it's not exactly commonplace, but it's far from enough to shatter someone's worldview. Ever since that meteor shower more than a decade ago, strange things have been happening in this small town. What happens when a person in a vegetative state who has been unconscious for years suddenly wakes up and disappears? What happens when a giant wolf, bigger than a tiger, is spotted roaming in a dark forest at night? What happens when a little girl carrying a teddy bear appears in a quiet, deserted cemetery at night and vanishes in the blink of an eye? A strangely fast and incredibly strong monster roared as it chiseled through the mountain in the middle of the night. There are countless. Upon hearing that the child had been in an accident and nearly drowned, the parents of the group rushed over in a panic. Seeing that it was his mother Martha driving up and stopping by the roadside, David went to greet her with some confusion. "David, are you all right?" Martha rushed over anxiously, her face full of worry. She looked David over from head to toe, trying to see if he was injured anywhere. "Does your leg hurt? What about your chest? Did you choke?" "I'm fine, Mother." After patiently showing his mother several times that she was fine, David finally managed to calm her down. Holding his mother's hand, which was even colder than his own, David smiled and said, "Why are you here? Where is Father?" He had actually wanted to show his abilities to his parents for a long time. Unlike Clark, when he used his strength, his skin turned purple and stripes appeared on his chin, clearly indicating a genetic mutation. He looked more like an alien than a Kryptonian, which worried Jonathan and Martha. The police just called. Your brother was in a car accident on another bridge and fell into the river. Your father went to see him. Martha's expression was worried and strange. Strangely enough, both of her sons had accidents on the same day at noon. One school bus skidded and plunged into the river, and the other was hit by a car and fell into the river. A car accident? He wrecked someone else's car. David was puzzled. Is the driver all right? Will he have to pay compensation? The school bus fell into the river. This plot seems familiar. How come Clark managed to avoid it but still fell into the river? Is this the power of fate? David, Clark is your brother. Hearing her youngest son say this, Martha, who was originally worried, said helplessly. I know. But his body wouldn't be damaged by a truck, would it? David shrugged. Even if it's smashed, as long as it's not dead, just put it in the sun to dry. See you this afternoon, Chloe. After chatting with his mother for a few minutes and saying goodbye to Chloe, the mother and son turned and walked to the car, got into the old pickup truck that had served the Kent family for more than 10 years, and drove away. After David left, Chloe, who had been wrapped in a blanket by the rescuers, was shivering from the cold. Suddenly I noticed a footprint not far away, and under the footprint was a piece of fresh green waterweed that had been crushed. Okay. Chloe looked puzzled and glanced around. Whose footprints are these? Before everyone could break the window and escape, the school bus was already on shore. Why are there seaweeds here? Apart from a few injured students and a few students who thought it was a good opportunity to pretend to have bumped into something and ask for leave to play at home. Classes continued as scheduled that afternoon and the following day, and nothing was delayed. David couldn't help but marvel at the town's residents' thick skin and adaptability. Being exposed to a meteorite shower makes all the difference. The next day, at dusk, David and Clark returned home from school. At the farm, in front of the small courtyard, a brand new red pickup truck sat quietly, its shiny paint reflecting the afterglow of the setting sun, adorned with a firework, like a gift. Whose car is this? Seeing his mother emerge from the barn after a busy day, Clark approached her with a smile and asked. Mom, are we finally getting a new car? This is your car, Clark. Mine. You saved Lex, and he gave you the car. Martha frowned, took out a thank you note, and handed it to Clark. David had heard yesterday that Clark was hit off a bridge by an out-of-control silver sports car, but he was unharmed, while the car's owner nearly died in the river. Clark pulled him out of the river, saving the man's life, and the man was amazed by his body. Dear Clark, drive carefully, don't make the same mistake I did. Upon hearing this, Clark eagerly tore open the letter and read aloud excitedly in a low voice, I am deeply grateful for yesterday's events, Lex Luthor. He had already figured out how to drive this beautiful pickup truck to school. He was sure it would catch Leonardo's attention. David, who hadn't paid much attention to the matter before, raised an eyebrow and his expression turned strange when he heard the name and looked at the thank you letter. Wait a minute, Clark, you saved Lex Luthor. Yeah, what's wrong? The young Superman looked up, puzzled as to why his brother had that expression. Chapter 6 Son, it's time. Lex Luthor, one of Superman's lifelong adversaries. After discovering Superman, he dedicated himself to freeing the world from Superman's threat. In his view, Superman confined humanity to a comfortable cradle, denying them the opportunity to grow in the face of crises, thus weakening the human race's potential. Clark didn't save anyone yesterday. Lex Luthor would most likely have died if he fell into the river in his youth. But he ended up saving one of his greatest enemies. Clark, whatever makes you happy. David shrugged. Page 7. Of course I'm very happy. Clark chuckled, Mom, where are the car keys? David, want to go for a drive with me? He asked his younger brother, his frustration from the past few days easing somewhat. He couldn't wait to drive this car, his first car in his life. Given his family's financial situation, he thought he would have to wait until he started working to get one. "Clark," Martha hesitated, "the key is with your father." Rumble. Next to the hay shredder, Jonathan was busy processing hay from the farm. "Dad!" Clark excitedly pulled David aside, wanting to ask for the key. Before the young Superman could even speak, Jonathan stopped the lawnmower, his expression turning slightly grim. He said seriously, "I know you really want it, but you can't take it." He was still recalling the look in Lex Luthor's eyes yesterday as he observed the wrecked car pulled from the river, then turned to the unharmed Clark a look of astonishment and bewilderment, as if witnessing a miracle that defied common sense and shouldn't exist, with a hint of desire to investigate and uncover the truth. It's like an ambitious business owner discovering a unique new project. He had a bad feeling, though he wasn't sure if it was just his imagination. "Why? I saved him?" Clark asked, puzzled. "This does not mean you can accept expensive thanks from others without feeling guilty. The new car is for you, Dad. I can drive the old one." "It has nothing to do with that," Jonathan said quickly, noticing the displeasure on his son's face. "A pickup truck is nothing to the Lex family." David agreed with Clark's statement. The Luthor Corporation is one of the world's most well-known business groups. Even in Smallville, a remote town near the Metropolis, the Luthor family's fertilizer plant is a pillar industry, and more than 2,000 people in the town work for the Luthor family. Clark saved Lex Luthor. A pickup truck was hardly expensive for the life of an heir to a massively wealthy corporation. "Listen to your son, it's normal that we can't have everything we want in life." Jonathan wanted to explain patiently. "Normal? I've had enough of normal." Clark's pent-up frustration from the past few days finally exploded, interrupting his father. He was clearly capable of many things, he was clearly capable of more than just watching, he was clearly capable of doing his best in anything he set his mind to. But to maintain a normal life, he had to hide himself and could only be an insignificant lackey. He stood by the playground, feeling bitter, watching the person he secretly loved being in someone else's arms, passionately kissing that person. Is this normal? Dodging his father's hand that tried to put his arm around his shoulder, he angrily walked to the grass shredder, turned it on, and amidst the deafening buzzing sound, stuck his arm into the constantly working blades. "Kaka! Father, tell me!" Like encountering an indestructible high-density alloy, the blade chipped, the gears broke, the lawnmower emitted a puff of black smoke, and stopped working. "Clark!" Even knowing that his son was made of steel, Jonathan still screamed and rushed over to struggle to pull his son's arm out from inside. Only his clothes were torn to shreds, there wasn't even a red mark on Clark's arm. "I know you're great, Clark, but have you ever thought that repairing a lawnmower costs money?" Looking at Clark, who was in the throes of adolescence, David casually put his hands in his pockets and said indifferently. He vented his anger, but the only result was that the lawnmower got damaged. "Father, did you see that? I was born abnormal." Hearing his brother's words, Clark became even more furious, his voice agitated, unable to accept his condition. Hearing the commotion, the mother, Martha, rushed over. Seeing the scene, she guessed what had happened and exchanged a worried glance with her husband, Jonathan. "Perhaps, it's time, son." Jonathan sighed and wearily took off his work gloves. "This day will come eventually." "What?" Clark suddenly had a bad feeling. "Come with me." He turned and walked heavily, making Clark follow. Then he glanced at his youngest son and hesitated for a moment. "David, you too. As a member of this family, you also have the right to know the truth." Although David was his and Martha's biological son, Clark was just an alien baby they found, and of a different race from the couple. But kind-hearted Jonathan and Martha never treated each other differently, in his heart, they were both his sons. "I know some things can't be kept from you forever, especially after discovering that you, Clark, are extraordinary and possess unimaginable power. In the dilapidated car repair shop, a blonde, strong worker stood next to the car, listening to upbeat death rock music, and reached into the car to turn the key. The dashboard lights up, the engine starts successfully, and the worker chewing gum smiles smugly as he closes the hood of the car in front. Just as they were about to take a break, the workers suddenly noticed a thin, ghostly figure standing in the shadows by the shop entrance. "Damn it, you scared me to death." The worker muttered a curse under his breath, then suddenly realized that the person in the shadows looked somewhat familiar. "Do I know you?" He squinted and recognized the person who had come, then walked over. "You look like that scarecrow, what's his name again? I think it's Jerome." Jerome, with his black hair and slender build, had sunken cheeks like a skeleton, staring at him coldly without saying a word. "I heard you injured your head in that meteor shower and fell into a coma." As he spoke, the worker, a former Smallville High School football player, contemptuously wiped his oil-stained hands on the other person's clothes. Finally willing to leave the hospital bed. "Look at your small frame." Before he could finish speaking, a powerful electric current shot out from the spot where he touched Jerome's shoulder. A burnt smell wafted through the air. The worker was suddenly thrown 3 or 4 meters away, crashing into a tool rack and falling heavily to the ground. "Monster!" He raised his hand, which was charred and throbbing with pain from the electric shock, and backed away with a drastic change in expression. "Listen, that was over a decade ago." The worker immediately realized why the other person was there and wanted to dissuade him from his revenge, so he cried out in pain. "That's just a game." Game. Chapter 7. I will bring Clark back. Game. Jerome raised his hand as if he had heard a joke. There was a horrific scar on his palm from a steel nail piercing through it. After Jesus was crucified, he took on all the sins of the world and ascended to heaven. "Stab it." As he spoke, his palm emitted a violent and dazzling electric current, causing the workers to stare wide-eyed and horrified. 17 years later, I have returned to the world of the living. God gave me these abilities to cleanse your sins. Since you like games so much. Now, let's play another game. Jerome walked up step by step, as if death were approaching. Ah! Electric light illuminated the window, accompanied by chilling screams. A dozen minutes later, a thin figure pulled up a hood and coldly walked away. In the auto repair shop, a corpse, charred from torture, lay quietly on the ground, no longer flamboyant or contemptuous, curled up in a ball, as if back to the state of an infant. Page 8. Caca. Jonathan opened the barn door. The smell of old, rotten rice mixed with dampness wafted over. A classic scene. David already knows what's going to happen. Clark is about to learn about his origins. He unusually composed himself, looking at the bewildered Clark beside him, a hint of worry rising in his heart, unsure if Clark could accept the truth. Because of David's existence, especially since he had just been born, Jonathan and Martha had no suitable reason to adopt another child. The couple secretly adopted Clark, claiming to the public that the two were twin brothers. "What are you saying, Father?" A nameless panic gripped Clark's heart, and he began to regret his earlier outburst at his parents. His father and mother were doing it for his own good, wanting to protect him. He knows everything. Why didn't he control himself just now, Clark? This is what your parents left you, Clark. Jonathan took something out of an inconspicuous, worn-out box, his expression heavy with sadness, and handed it to Clark in a somber voice. It was a long, narrow stone seal, jet black in color, with an S embossed on its head. Parents. Clark couldn't believe what he was hearing. His face turned pale as he stared at the long, black object, too afraid to reach out and touch it, as if it were a fragile bubble that he would break if he reached out, and some things would be irreparable. "Father, this joke is not funny. Why isn't my father's heart beating faster even though he's lying?" The key to the lonely fortress. David frowned and looked away from the key. Watching Clark's reaction, I worried that he would be devastated by this sudden news. For most people, suddenly learning in a single day that their loving parents are not their biological parents and have no blood relation is already hard enough to bear. What if I found out I was an alien? David suddenly remembered a remark made by a pale-skinned, seemingly insane man. To drive someone crazy, all you need to do is give them a terrible day. The Joker. Probably not. His eyelids twitched. If a Joker like Superman were to actually be developed, it would be a truly fatal joke. Squeak. Then they opened the cellar door, and Jonathan led his two sons down, lifting up something that was covered by a canvas. After the dust settled, a small spaceship came into view. It had a streamlined shape, was the size of a cradle, and looked like it could only carry a baby. Do not. Seeing the spaceship that shouldn't have been on the farm at all, Clark was struck dumb and stumbled back 2 steps. Father, don't do this to me. His expression was stiff, with an almost pleading look, like a child about to be abandoned looking at Jonathan. Clark, actually you are the son that Martha and I adopted. Seeing his son's reaction, Jonathan felt extremely distressed, but having already said all that, he couldn't stop now. Better to end it quickly than suffer for a long time, so he gritted his teeth and told the truth. You come from outer space. We found you in a meteor shower more than 10 years ago. Clark felt as if he were walking on clouds, his head was spinning, and he felt as if everything in front of him was about to leave him. And what about David? Suddenly he saw David, and as if grasping at a straw, he hurriedly asked. Don't tell him. David is my and Martha's biological son. Seeing that David showed almost no surprise, Jonathan was puzzled, thinking that he still believed it was all fake. But he couldn't care less about David at this moment. After hesitating for a moment, he told the cruel and hurtful truth. No, no. This is all fake, I absolutely refuse to accept it. With gritted teeth and a roar like a wounded beast, Clark, his eyes bloodshot, turned and fled almost insane. He wanted to escape this lie, to escape this heartbreaking reality. Swish! At supersonic speeds, Clark fled the cellar as if his life depended on it and disappeared. Son! Jonathan was anxious to catch up, but as a mortal father, how could he keep up with the son of the Kryptonian? He could only stop helplessly by the cellar door, looking at the empty barn, just like his heart. Clark will figure it out, father. Seeing his father's distraught appearance, David was deeply moved. He had never seen the stubborn and inflexible Jonathan show such an expression before. He stepped forward to support his father and comforted him. I don't believe he would abandon our family. David, why aren't you surprised at all? Jonathan looked back wearily. We only have a few houses, and Clark is so unusual. In fact, David didn't know why Clark hadn't discovered the spaceship in the cellar for over 10 years, especially when he was a child who loved to explore and climb up and down. He had secretly sneaked in here to check it out when he was just a few years old. After all, it's a real spaceship. I understand. Jonathan looked several years older, doubting whether his actions were correct. He was helped to sit down on the steps and unexpectedly patted his son's shoulder. David, my son, you have done a good job. His voice was hoarse as he looked at his son with a gratified expression. The son had always been exceptionally sensible and had never shown any unusual reaction to his son's behavior. Where Clark comes from, whether he's an alien or not, doesn't matter. What matters is that he's our family, the brother you grew up with. Don't blame him for reacting so strongly, he just can't accept it right now. I'll go find him and bring him back. Seeing his father speaking in such a dazed state, David frowned and got up to leave. If, Jonathan paused, then added, if Clark doesn't want to come back for the time being, don't force him. He received 2 pieces of bad news in one day, and his past life as Kent's son was denied. He could imagine the impact this would have on his eldest son. I will. David nodded to his father. However, he didn't think that way in his heart, he thought to himself. If we can't convince Clark, given the current situation, the only option is to deliver a scathing punch to calm Clark down. I've signed a contract. Starting today, I'll be updating twice a day. Thank you all for your support. Chapter 8, I was overthinking it. 3K. A bar with bright lights and vibrant colors. After escaping his home, Clark, like a walking corpse, walked in. Unable to accept reality, he now wanted to get drunk and forget everything. I've heard that when you're drunk, you can stop thinking about anything. You're only 18 years old, and state law prohibits us from selling you spirits. The bartender glanced at Clark's ID, then looked up and asked, "Want a beer?" "Anything is fine as long as it's alcohol." After having his ID card retrieved, a dejected Clark urged the bartender to bring it over quickly. Men and women danced wildly on the dance floor, while others excitedly played drinking games in the booths. All the noise and bustle had nothing to do with him. Clark only felt lost and lonely, like a lone wolf that had gotten separated from its pack. An indescribable feeling of distress filled my heart. Page 9. Is it all a lie? Recalling the scenes of my past life with my parents and younger brother. He never belonged to that family, or even to the planet where he grew up. As a child, Clark wondered why other people couldn't lift trucks, would get injured falling from a few stories high, and why his parents and brother were different from him. Now he has the answer. Because he has no blood relation to his father or brother. I'm just an alien monster that my parents picked up. Beside the dimly lit bar, Clark stared blankly at the name Clark Kent on his ID card, his eyes red-rimmed. His surname isn't Kent at all, and his first name shouldn't be in this form either. It should have a name that sounds strange and difficult to pronounce to Earthlings. Of the billions of people on Earth, none were of his kind, and no place was his home. Why? In a fit of extreme agitation and instability, Clark clenched his fists in anger. Was this God playing a cruel joke on him? Why isn't he from Earth? Why can't he be a blood relative of his parents and brother? He wished that everything his father told him today was a lie, that he could still taste his mother's carefully made apple pie when he woke up tomorrow morning, that he could still bicker with his younger brother on the school bus to go to school, and that he could come back and help his father with some farm work, living a simple yet fulfilling life. Why did my life have to be suddenly disrupted? If he is suddenly told this terrible news, how can he go back to that home and enjoy his parents' love with a clear conscience? Confused and angry, Clark suddenly felt an urge to punch and destroy to vent his anger. At this time, "Clark?" A hand patted his shoulder. "It's really you." Clark turned his head and saw Whitney and several teammates holding beer in their hands, with unfriendly smiles on their faces, like hounds that had spotted a weak rabbit, subtly surrounding him. "Clark, why are you drinking alone here all by yourself?" Whitney held a beer in one hand and had her other arm around Clark's neck, seemingly very intimate, but her arm was secretly tightening. "Whitney, don't bother me now." To his surprise, Clark, whose neck should have been pinched painfully, remained motionless, his body as if cast in steel, and he slapped Whitney's hand away. Just as he was about to destroy something to vent his anger, someone came up to provoke him. However, thanks to the good upbringing he received from Jonathan and his wife for over 10 years, the kind-hearted future Superman held back and did not fight back. "I have good news for you, Clark." Whitney was knocked off balance, his beer spilling onto the ground. Feeling humiliated in front of everyone, he was furious. "I've decided that you'll be this year's Scarecrow." He gestured to the football players to put down their beers, and then he was about to forcibly take Clark away. "I told you, don't mess with me." The cacophony of rock music from the bar assaulted his ears. Clark abruptly stood up, grabbed Whitney by the collar, his eyes blazing with anger, barely able to contain himself as he tried to strike. But suddenly, Whitney's collar was ripped open, revealing a familiar green crystal necklace. He was enveloped by radiation from kryptonite. What? Clark's divine power rapidly drained away, and he looked distressed and in pain. The blood vessels in the hand that was near the kryptonite even bulged abnormally and turned green, as if he had been poisoned. In the flickering light, Whitney didn't notice this, and punched the weakened man to the ground, then contemptuously straightened her clothes. "So what if I messed with you, Clark?" He crouched down, grabbed Clark by the back of his hand, and his low voice was filled with jealousy and ferocity. "I noticed the way you looked at my girlfriend a long time ago, and I know what you're thinking. Who do you think she is?" With the high school football tournament approaching, Lana gives her boyfriend the meteorite crystal necklace she has worn since childhood, hoping it will be a token of her affection and that he will be blessed with good luck in the tournament, win the championship, and be scouted. As a result, Clark experienced the power of kryptonite once again. "You really want her necklace?" Noticing that Clark was staring at the necklace around his neck and seemed to be feeling jealous, Whitney sneered and hung the necklace around his neck, humiliating him severely. "Then I'll give it to you. This is the closest you can get to Lana. Take him away." He stood up and called to a few football players, who then carried the even more distressed Clark out the back door. With so many people around, Whitney planned to take Clark to a secluded cornfield and teach him a lesson. "I'll teach you to stop your delusional fantasies." Suddenly, a voice that seemed devoid of emotion came from behind. "Where are you taking Clark, Whitney?" "David." Whitney was somewhat surprised to see a figure with his hands in the pockets of his brown jacket slowly walking towards her, and then she gave a cold laugh. "Since you've come to me of your own accord, I'll take you with me. Let Clark see how his brother is being implicated because of his inappropriate thoughts." David remained expressionless, as if he hadn't heard what he was about to do. "David, hurry up." Supported in a disheveled state, Clark, too weak to even stand, saw his brother and, enduring the pain, quickly shouted, "You can't beat them." Whitney and her group of 5, all of whom were physically strong members of the school's football team, did not want to see their younger brother being bullied. Clark's eagerness +18, regret +13. "I originally thought you might not be able to handle what happened today, and that you might fall into a bad habit and cause trouble for the family." Ignoring Whitney and the others, David looked at him, raised an eyebrow, and spoke slowly. "Looks like I was overthinking it, Clark." Even when facing a few high school students wielding kryptonite, he still managed to get the short end of the stick. "Superior." Whitney couldn't help but get annoyed by his attitude of ignoring her. "Let him see what you're capable of." Two tall, muscular rugby players, their faces fierce, pounced on him like wolves from the left and right, throwing punches. The commotion at the bar finally attracted some attention. Many people looked over, clapping and cheering, eager to see what would happen. "Okay, go ahead and attack." Fights are a common occurrence in bars. David stood still, casually dodging the first punch thrown at him, and then unleashed a lightning-fast backhand strike. Bang! The rugby player's eyes bulged out, his face flushed red like a boiled lobster, and he knelt on the ground in pain, clutching his stomach and spitting out a mouthful of saliva. Another man charged forward with a fist raised, but David swiftly and beautifully spun around and elbowed him back. As if hit on the head with a baseball bat, the man lost control and fell headfirst to the ground, unconscious. Oh! In less than 2 seconds, he took down 2 opponents in the blink of an eye. Some people in the bar were surprised and applauded. "Pretty. Is this young man so skilled that he's a professional fighter?" Shock from Clark +8, astonishment +9. David ignored the emotional reminders he often omitted, while Whitney stood frozen in place, staring in disbelief at the 2 teammates who had been knocked down. "You?" Clark was even more surprised, he had never known his brother had this side to him. "Go together." Whitney and 2 of the team members who had thrown Clark to the ground charged at David. Bang bang bang! David's steps were as light and graceful as a butterfly, and the three of them couldn't even touch a corner of his clothes. His fists were as powerful as bee stings, and with 3 punches, he easily and neatly knocked them down while strolling around. The 3 men lay on the ground, their faces bruised and swollen. Impossible. Page 10. Whitney clutched his chest in excruciating pain, as if his ribs had been broken, yet he gritted his teeth and struggled to get up again, charging toward David. He's just a guy who's afraid to participate in any activity on campus. Just lie still, Whitney. He had just gotten up when David kicked him over like an adult bullying a child, casually walking past the helpless man and heading towards Clark. If you use too much force, your skin tone will show. However, dealing with these few people doesn't require superhuman strength. The onlookers in the bar, not wanting to cause trouble, all stepped back and made way for him as he approached. Are retired Navy SEALs really that good? Where did you learn martial arts? David. Kryptonians face life-threatening risks from prolonged exposure to kryptonite. Clark, his neck veins bulging abnormally and his face pale, asked in astonishment, enduring the pain. He had no idea that his younger brother possessed such formidable fighting skills. On TV. David replied calmly, pulling off the necklace around his neck. On the TV. Clark hadn't expected this answer. Seeing that his brother was all right, he finally gave up and fainted. David casually hoisted the necklace into his pocket, then turned and left the bar, with everyone making way for him. Even though the fight was affecting business, the bar owner didn't dare to ask David to stay. Walk some distance. Under the cold moonlight, we arrived at an empty street. Clark, perched on David's shoulder, groggily awoke, realized they were on their way home, and struggled to get up. Put me down, David, I don't want to go back. Something came up at home, so I'm 1,000 words short. I'll make it up later. Chapter 9. I'm doing this for your own good, Clark. After Clark and David left, Whitney and several football players, who had been knocked to the ground, struggled to their feet after a while. Several people attacked one person, but they didn't even touch his clothes. Amidst the laughter of the crowd, they left in a sorry state, helping each other along. They had only been gone a short while when a thin figure emerged from the bar, staring coldly at the departing group in baseball uniforms. No rush, there's plenty of time. He muttered something to himself, then returned to the bar to continue slowly drinking. His gaze occasionally swept over a burly black man picking up girls in the corner of the bar, his face expressionless, as if he were looking at a dead man. The original plan must not be disrupted. As for those equally bad high school team members, he remembered that tomorrow night was the town's high school's spring dance. I've never attracted anyone's attention at a ball before, but this time is different. Jerome sneered. He will be the most dazzling one at the ball. Put me down, David. Clark woke up weakly and struggled to get off David's shoulder. I don't want to go back. He hasn't figured out how to go back and face his parents yet. What? 18-year-old Clark wants to run away from home. David felt there was a very simple solution to this problem, without needing to go through all that complicated back and forth. He raised his hand and delivered a chop to the neck. Snapped. Clark felt a tap on the back of his neck and looked back at his brother in confusion, not understanding what his brother was going to do. You didn't use enough force. Seeing this, David clicked his tongue. Having escaped the radiation from the kryptonite, Clark gradually began to recover, even though there was no sunlight at the moment. Bang! He delivered another blow. The terrifying force was enough to cleave a tank in two with a single chop, and the shockwave spread for more than 10 meters, like a raging storm, causing the weeds on both sides of the road to sway violently. Clark's eyes rolled back and he fainted. It's done. As his skin regained its color on the dimly lit road, David carried the unconscious Clark back to the farm. Inside, the couple was still waiting for their 2 children to return, while a warm light shone from the doorway of the house. Before going in, he took out a green, glowing kryptonite necklace, waved it around Clark's face, and gave him a layer of makeup. Clark, who had almost recovered from the kryptonite radiation, was in a coma and his expression turned painful again. His face was weak and pale, as if he were seriously ill. Feeling that it was about time, David put away the kryptonite with satisfaction. Kryptonians would have to be exposed to kryptonite for months or even years before their lives would be in danger. It shouldn't be a problem in the short term, especially since Clark isn't your average Kryptonian. Of course, I'm doing this for your own good, Clark. He was definitely not after any informational notifications from Clark about pain +3 or +2. David smiled, then carried Clark inside. Oh my God, David, what's wrong with your brother? Upon seeing this, Martha covered her mouth in shock. Clark, why did you faint? Jonathan looked incredulous. Clark had been stronger than an ox since he was a child and had never been sick or injured. This was the first time the couple had seen him like this, pale-faced and unconscious. I don't know either. It seems that Clark's superhuman physique has a problem. David replied without batting an eye. Quickly, make him lie down. Jonathan carefully took Clark from his youngest son's shoulders and laid him flat on the sofa. Martha quickly poured herself a glass of water, came to the sofa, and anxiously called her son's name. Clark. The couple were both somewhat flustered. Because, in fact, although the two of them are middle-aged, they have never encountered a situation where their son is sick. Well. Feeling a jolt, Clark groggily woke up. His parents anxiously surrounded him, their eyes filled with deep concern, and they were very careful not to shake him too hard. Father, Mother. Returning to his warm and familiar home, and looking at his parents gathered around him, he felt somewhat dazed. He had almost forgotten when his father's hair turned white, his face became weathered, and his body was no longer as strong. His mother's eyes were etched with wrinkles by the years, and her skin was loose. Everything seemed like a knife stabbing into his eyes. I only remember that when I was a child, I loved to ride on my father's shoulders and let him run around. I had no interest in passing games that other fathers and sons liked to play, which made my father helpless and he could only play with David. Oh, and there was a time when he loved corn dogs and would always pester his mother to make them for him. Scenes from the past flashed before my eyes. Clark felt a sharp pain in his nose, as if he had been punched, because he had wasted his parents' youth. My parents found me in a meteor shower and raised me with the same care and hardship they would give to their own son. They cared about my mental and emotional well-being even more than they did about David. They never asked me for anything, and never thought of getting anything from me. His parents could have easily used his abilities to package him as a promising young football or soccer star and make a lot of money, so he wouldn't have to spend all his time working on the farm, but they never did. They even made me hide my abilities just to protect me, but I still resented it. Clark, what's wrong? Martha was even more worried when her son remained silent for a long time, fearing that something was wrong with his health. Page 11. Mother. Clark's eyes reddened, and he suddenly stood up, filled with guilt, and opened his arms to hug the couple who loved him most in the world. I was wrong, Father. No matter my status, it cannot change the fact that I am your son. He realized how foolish he had been. His parents had never cared about his identity and had treated him like their own son for over 10 years, giving him the best and the warmest love in the world. However, he became conflicted about this after learning the truth. As long as you come back, Clark. Jonathan felt a weight lifted from his heart, a smile spreading across his face. He and Martha exchanged a relieved glance, and he hugged his son. Looks like someone has given up on running away from home. David, leaning against the doorframe, clapped his hands with a slightly amused expression. Clark, remembering his earlier embarrassment, said to his younger brother. Happiness from Clark +14, gratitude +7, shame +5. You always see things better than I do, David. Jonathan and Martha acknowledge this, saying their youngest son is smart and mature, and they never have to worry about him. Clark, are you all right? The warm family atmosphere returned to normal, and Martha remembered her son's pale face earlier. Why did you look like you were sick? I'm fine, except for the back of my head, hiss. Clark touched the back of his head, as if he had been hit on the head by a rocket falling from the sky, and gasped in pain. He looked up at David in confusion. David, you... Was he weakened by Lana's necklace? How could he be beaten so badly by his younger brother? It shouldn't be. Looks like this hit was a bit too hard again. A thought flashed through his mind, but David changed the subject without making a sound. Perhaps Clark was injured by Whitney and the others. Injured? Clark, you got beaten up. Clark was about to ask David what was going on when Jonathan and Martha pressed him with questions and concern, and he couldn't find another opportunity to ask David. Under a sky full of stars, the farm houses a huge warehouse containing machinery and tools. On the second floor, through the open window, Clark explained the whole story to his parents, finally putting their minds at ease, as he hadn't been harmed at all. At least not from Whitney and the others. A gentle breeze rustled through the wheat fields of the farm, creating a pleasant and peaceful atmosphere, just like before. Clark sat by the window, gazing through the telescope at the unobstructed view a kilometer away, a smile unconsciously creeping onto his lips. Through the telescope, in front of a house, a beautiful black-haired figure sat on the steps of the porch, enjoying the evening breeze, and writing an English report. Most importantly, the green necklace was no longer around the figure's neck, which made him start to imagine. Suddenly, a figure stealthily approached Lana's house. After taking a few photos of Lana from behind the bushes, the figure put away the camera, deliberately shook the bushes, hurriedly and shyly put down a gift box, and ran away. Lana went over in confusion and opened the gift box. Several butterflies with brightly colored wings and green, shimmering dust fluttered out, like a scene from a fairy tale. She covered her mouth in surprise and looked out at the street, trying to find the person who had given her the gift. A suitor. Clark felt a pang of bitterness in his heart. Lana's charm was truly extraordinary. He decided to see who the person who gave him the gift was and whether he recognized them. I remember someone asking my mother for $300, saying he was very interested in astronomy. Suddenly, a voice came, and Clark was startled and turned around to look. David slowly walked up the stairs, his expression strange and surprised. To be honest, when I first saw you looking out at the outside world with this thing, I thought you were searching for your homeland among the stars with loneliness and sadness after learning about your origins. But the result? He raised an eyebrow as he looked at the astronomical telescope pointing directly at a house. Chapter 10 Everyone is a sinner. Although I am not entirely sure where I come from, this is undoubtedly my home. Upon hearing David's words, Clark paused for a moment, his tone more serious than ever before, as if speaking to him as well as to himself. I am certain of this, David, you, father, and mother are my family. That will never change. Some things that were once taken for granted suddenly became things that Clark realized he should do everything in his power to cherish and protect after nearly losing them today, things like family and kinship. Thank you for today, little brother. Don't expect me to stop telling my mother what you're doing with this thing all day by saying a few nice words. David was taken aback by Clark's blunt expression of his feelings, a man who was usually rather introverted, and looked away into the distance. This astronomical telescope was built to help humanity observe the magnificent and vast universe. Instead of being used to spy on one's crush, so as to have material for daydreams. David, I have absolutely no such thoughts. Clark frantically tried to explain that he didn't have that thought. I see. But David, who had thrown him into a panic by a single sentence, didn't give him the chance. He left with a clearly perfunctory remark and turned to leave. Clark's anxiety +7, embarrassment +4. Today was different from usual, a lot happened in a row, and the Kents and Clark experienced intense emotional ups and downs. David gained a lot of emotional insights as a result, and their level of integration improved further. Template integration rate increased from 81% to 83%. As the template progresses, it becomes increasingly difficult to improve the integration level, but even a small increase in integration level can bring greater power than the previous small increase. A morning breeze swept through Smallville High School. Sneakers glided nimbly back and forth, girls whispered among themselves and occasionally let out shy giggles, while boys raised their chins and boasted to their friends. Unlike their usual campus life, the students' faces were filled with excitement and anticipation. Tonight is the spring ball. You didn't take the school bus with David again today, Clark? Pete asked Clark what was going on. Yes, there are some things. I saved someone, and he gave me a gift, but I couldn't accept it, Clark explained. I went to return the gift this morning. This morning, without a word of complaint, he obediently followed his father's instructions to go to Lex Manor, exchange a few polite words with Lex Luthor, and then returned the pickup truck. What gift? Pete, who was interested, was about to ask further questions. That necklace is very important to me. Faint sounds drifted over, and Lana, standing not far away, looked heartbroken and pale. Whitney, standing next to her with a band-aid on her bruised nose and a red, swollen forehead, kept comforting his girlfriend and explaining things to her. What happened to Whitney's face? Pete was puzzled. Maybe he was drunk and fell down. Clark explained awkwardly, glancing at David's nonchalant expression. That necklace was carved from a meteorite left behind after my parents died in a meteor shower when I was a child. My aunt left it to me so that I could remember my parents, but you lost it. At the bar, some people got drunk and deliberately caused trouble. We fought with them, and afterwards we found that the necklace was missing. Lana, I promise I'll find it. Clark's exceptional hearing allowed him to overhear their conversation, and he frowned at Whitney's lying and deception of Lana. Upon hearing about the origins of Lana's necklace, he hesitated for a moment, then gritted his teeth and looked at David with pleading eyes, opening his mouth as if to say something. You're so kind, Clark. David, slightly exasperated, already guessed what he wanted to say and turned to leave. Although Thanos' super hearing is far inferior to that of Kryptonians, this distance is not a problem for him. Page 12. Needless to say, Clark was reluctant to give up the opportunity to speak freely with his dream girl. But she still decided to return the necklace to Lana. Even if returning the necklace would immediately heal the rift between Lana and Whitney and help Whitney, he would also lose his chance. Too kind, no wonder he's a future superhero. David could only offer his opinion on this. Before the evening dance, Clark kept pestering David, wanting the necklace back. David gave a perfunctory response. Why would you return the kryptonite you've already obtained? In addition, Clark kept requesting that emotional points be credited to his account. At the ball, Chloe, who had not been invited to dance, had no choice but to team up with Pete to avoid an awkward situation. As for David and Clark, neither of them cared about these things. Melodious music, in the brightly lit dance floor. Couples of young men and women in formal attire exchanged glances, their faces beaming with smiles, like birds slowly taking flight. Beside the long dining table, David casually picked up a pastry and tasted it. Look there, your dream girl is dancing with another man's arm around her waist. He pointed with his fork at the most eye-catching pair in the center and chuckled at Clark, who was making repeated requests beside him. Even so, you still want to return the necklace. Clark stared at the center of the dance floor, feeling a bitter taste in his mouth, as if he had eaten a lemon. Even though she was a little angry, Lana, unaware of the situation, did not refuse Whitney's invitation to the prom after being reassured that Whitney had lied and completely absolved herself of any responsibility. Under the envious gazes of the crowd, the two looked deeply into each other's eyes and danced slowly, the most dazzling couple in the middle of the dance floor. The person you like dresses up for the ball, but it's not for him. He was just an inconspicuous, invisible person standing on the edge of the ball. That was originally Lana's necklace, David. Clark's tone betrayed his disappointment, but he still spoke. David was somewhat exasperated with Clark and didn't want to make things worse for him in his current predicament. Okay, I'll give it to you tomorrow. It's fine if you don't have a chance anyway, Lana isn't right for you. Clark's face lit up with joy, and upon hearing this, he wanted to ask why he said that. Suddenly, the fire alarm on the ceiling above the school auditorium was triggered, and water poured down from the pipes like a torrential downpour. What? Where did the water come from? The fire alarm has been triggered. Where is the fire? Screams erupted, and everyone in the auditorium was caught off guard, instantly becoming soaked to the bone. Their meticulously applied makeup was ruined, and their hair, styled with hair wax, collapsed. Everyone was disheveled and panicked. David's hands were soaked with slurry, and he glanced at his wet clothes, his expression turning sour. Was it an accident? Clark quickly scanned the area but couldn't see any fire or even smoke. Is the fire alarm broken? Or was the central control system outside triggered? Bang! Just then, the auditorium doors were suddenly kicked open. A series of clear footsteps sounded. Stab it! God said that everyone is born with original sin. The entire room fell silent as everyone turned to look in their direction. A slender figure wearing a hood walked in, raised his head to reveal a cold face, and a dazzling current, like a silver snake, shot out from his hand, while a burnt smell filled the air. Although my target this time isn't all of you, however. Amidst the horrified and bewildered gazes of the crowd, he paused, then slammed his hand, imbued with a powerful electric current capable of melting steel, onto a damp patch of ground. I don't mind helping you absolve your sins ahead of time. Sorry for the late update, I updated a bit more than usual to make up for the half chapter I owed yesterday. Chapter 11 killed him, Clark. First, the fire alarm was triggered, and everyone got soaked. The sudden appearance of a person with superpowers who can generate electricity makes it clear that this is a meticulously planned massacre. David raised an eyebrow as he looked at the person at the door. I had long suspected that the strange tales circulating in this small town were not unfounded. It is very likely that the radiation from kryptonite caused genetic mutations in some people. After all, the rich rely on technology, while the poor rely on mutation. But unexpectedly, a madman suddenly appeared and wanted to kill almost everyone in the town's high school. What? The crowd screamed in terror. What kind of horror movie is this? Chloe and Pete were trembling with fear. Anyone with a modicum of common sense knows what happens when a dangerous electric current comes into contact with water. That person could instantly kill hundreds of people here simply by touching the ground with both hands. Raise your hand. Everyone seemed to see hell beckoning to them, and some of the boys wanted to rush forward to stop it. But it was all in vain. That devilishly thin figure swiftly pressed his electrifying hands to the ground. In less than a second, at a distance of 20 or 30 meters, it was impossible for anyone to stop him. In an instant, David frowned, about to make a move. Even setting aside the fact that he knew some of the people among them, saving them was just a simple matter of lifting a finger. From another perspective, if everyone here has perished, leaving only Clark and me to survive, it's hard not to attract the attention of those with ulterior motives. David? No. However, someone was faster than him. Clark glanced at David, who was in danger beside him, and his heart skipped a beat. His expression changed drastically, and with a low shout, he burst out with unprecedented speed and disappeared from the spot. Stab it! In the blink of an eye, with less than 10 centimeters remaining, the current in Jeremy's hand was about to touch the ground. But the next instant, he was suddenly grabbed around the waist and carried away. What happened? Where is that person? Some people screamed in fear and closed their eyes, but the excruciating pain they had imagined from the electric shock never came. They touched their bodies. When they opened their eyes and looked at the door again, the devil who wanted to murder them had disappeared. Only a cold wind blew in from outside, making them shiver. Is it an illusion? Was everything that just happened a mass hallucination? Some of those who even ran toward Jerome to stop him didn't see what happened because Clark was moving too fast, far beyond the limits of human vision. They didn't even see a blurry afterimage. When something happened, he didn't look at Lana immediately. David slowly put down the pastry in his hand, feeling a little relieved. Page 13. Looks like you can still be saved, Clark, you haven't completely fallen. My brother didn't forget his family for a girl who had a boyfriend but treated other boys differently. But how are you going to handle this, Clark? If not handled properly, this matter could cause trouble for the family. David frowned and stepped back, his body blurring as he disappeared from the spot. Everyone was still shaken and looked around, wondering if this was a malicious prank. What about David and Clark? Chloe patted her chest in fear, her eyes searching for the two who had disappeared. They were just here. Pete looked around. Maybe they got bored while we were dancing and left. A look of doubt flashed in Chloe's eyes. But not long before the incident, she saw the two brothers still there. Could she have remembered wrong? Who are you, and why are you doing this? Arriving on the road outside the town, Clark threw down the madman he was carrying on his shoulder and angrily questioned him. Do you know that there are hundreds of lives lost there? Why am I here? Standing up, Jerome shook his head, looked at his hands, and then looked around. I was supposed to kill those sinners right away, so how did I suddenly end up on a highway in the suburbs? Who are you? He looked at Clark in front of him, realizing that this man had brought him here. His body tensed up, and he was extremely vigilant. He's definitely not the only special person in the world. It's you? I saw you at the bar. The next second, looking at Clark's angry face, Jerome recognized him, the person who almost had the same experience as him. They almost made you a scarecrow. His face darkened, a sense of betrayal rising within him. Electricity surged in his hands, dazzling and terrifying under the dim streetlights, its piercing sound like the screeching of crows echoing far and wide in the open wilderness. But you want to protect them. What's the difference between those guys in football team uniforms and the people who nailed him to the cross more than a decade ago? Stab it! He roared and questioned, as a powerful electric current blasted Clark away. You want to kill Whitney and the others? Absolutely not. After flying 7 or 8 meters backward and landing on the ground, Clark got up as if nothing had happened, extinguished the sparks from the electric current burning his clothes, and upon hearing these words, realized his original target and said urgently. Even if Whitney was his rival, even if Whitney wanted to crucify him, he didn't deserve to die. God brought me back to earth, and I have a special mission to purify sin. The blow that could easily turn a person into a charred corpse failed to harm the opponent at all. Jerome was shocked, then enraged. You two are favored by God, yet you protect sinners. He unleashed a powerful electric current from his hands, which, from a distance, looked like he was holding up two small suns formed by the convergence of electric currents. You are not worthy of the power that God gave you to protect sinners. The burst of electricity struck the hard asphalt road, causing it to glow red-hot and melt, emitting a foul odor, like sulfur from hell. Scoff! Go to hell! Jerome stretched out his hands. The electric current, like a lightning tree growing rapidly in the air, split into branches, accompanied by a thick main trunk, and struck Clark at a speed far exceeding the speed of sound. Before he could dodge, Clark bent his arms to form a shield in front of him, and the clothes on his arms turned to ashes in an instant. The powerful electric current even caused him a slight pain, and he cried out in pain. Swish! In the next instant, Clark dodged, moving as fast as a bullet, and arrived beside Jerome. Time seemed to slow down dramatically. Jerome still stared fiercely ahead, unaware that electricity was surging from his palm. He looked at his hands and carefully pushed them out. Bang! The next second, time seemed to return to normal flow, and Jerome's body was as if he had been hit by a truck weighing more than 10 tons, tracing an arc of more than 10 meters before crashing heavily to the ground. What? Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, and he looked pained, as if he had broken at least a few ribs. I can't understand how anyone could like to help the person who bullies them. Jerome clutched his aching chest and glared at Clark with resentment. Why would Clark help those people when he was being bullied? That's betrayal. Your palm. Clark's expression changed when he saw the horrific scars on his hands, which looked like they had been pierced by steel nails. He gradually guessed what had happened. He recalled chatting with Chloe during break in the daytime, when Chloe mentioned a strange thing that happened in town. Recently, several people who were on the town's high school football team have been electrocuted by high voltage. Are you the serial killer who killed them? Are you taking revenge on those football team guys? I am going to kill you. Ignoring his words, Jerome endured the excruciating pain and tried to get up from the ground to attack him. Don't get up again, I don't want to accidentally kill you. Clark waved his hand in a slightly flustered manner. He hadn't been in many fights before, and he was afraid of accidentally killing the other person again. But Jerome became even angrier upon hearing this, and despite his injuries, he staggered and struggled to get up. If he wants to kill you, then kill him, Clark. Just as Clark was at a loss for what to do, a cold voice came. Chapter 12 David, what's wrong with your body? A figure he knew all too well, but who shouldn't have been there. With the sound of footsteps, David slowly emerged from the darkness under the streetlight. David, what did you say? Clark was puzzled and surprised by David's sudden appearance. How did you get here? I specially brought him out of town to come here. It's impossible to get here from school this quickly, even by car, in such a short time. Furthermore, if I heard correctly, his own brother asked him to kill someone? I said kill him, Clark. Ignoring his question, David glanced at Jerome, stopped in his tracks, and repeated solemnly. Jerome's anger plus 0.02, murderous intent plus 0.02. Surprisingly, this person can also provide emotional points, but compared to Clark, they are pitifully few. If you won't do it, I will. No, how can we kill someone? Clark, who had been taught kindness by Martha since childhood, was shocked and could not believe what he was hearing. He felt that the younger brother in front of him was somewhat unfamiliar. He killed more than one person, he's a madman, a damned man, isn't he? David heard what was said earlier. Moreover, just by looking at the other person, you can tell that he has lost his mind and wants to kill hundreds of people in one go without even blinking. We cannot carry out vigilante justice. Clark's expression turned slightly grim, and he softened his tone, offering a suggestion after initially refusing. Page 14. With the law in place, we can hand him over to the police station, where he will be sentenced and receive the punishment he deserves. He did not deny that Jerome should be sentenced to death, but no one should be above the law in life. You let him see your face. David stopped talking and strode toward Jerome, who had just managed to stand up from the ground. My face. Do you think a regular prison can hold him? When he gets out, will he retaliate against you? David wasn't worried about the tough-skinned Clark, but he countered that revenge could also be taken from those closest to the person in question. If he followed you to our house. When his parents were mentioned, Clark's expression changed, as he suddenly remembered something he had forgotten all along. He finally understood why his brother had immediately threatened to kill him. Clark touched his face, realizing that in his haste he had forgotten to conceal his identity. Swish! Jeremy showed no fear when facing Clark, but when David walked toward him with an icy aura, he felt a strange unease, as if he were a gentle elephant, the difference between him and a deadly lion. He could tell from David's deathly cold eyes that David's threat to kill him was not just empty words. Would someone who has witnessed his abilities and is still confident enough to come and kill him be an ordinary person? Stab it! A surge of electricity erupted, and before Jeremy could even raise his hand in a surprise attack, David vanished from his spot without even blinking. Thanos's abilities do not include super speed, his speed is only close to the speed of sound. But that's enough. To prevent future troubles, your execution must be brought forward. David, along with his voice, came to the startled Jerome and effortlessly lifted him into the air, gripping his neck with one hand as if he were a chick. Like being choked by iron clamps, Jerome struggled to breathe, his face turning bluish-purple, and his legs weakly kicked in mid-air. "You, what kind of monster are you?" Staring at David, whose skin had turned purple, he widened his eyes in horror, struggling to grasp David's hands, desperately activating his abilities in the face of death. Let me go. Stab it." The terrifying electric current struck David's hand, turning half of his sleeve to ashes, but it did not shake his slender body, which was as strong as steel, in the slightest. "David, what do you look like?" Caught between his parents and murder, Clark was already torn. When he saw his brother's sudden change in demeanor, he froze in shock, his mouth agape. "How did you become like this? You're not the only one with secrets, Clark." David glanced at Clark and replied. He could have snapped Jerome's neck at any moment, but he deliberately didn't, he had a theory. Clark quickly realized that this wasn't the important thing right now. He left a blur in place, flew over quickly, and grabbed his wrist. "Put him down, brother." He hurriedly tried to stop David. To his surprise, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't pry David's hands off. From a force strong enough to make an ordinary person let go, to a force strong enough to bend a steel rod as thick as an arm, the road beneath his feet could not withstand the weight and cracked under his force. David's body remained motionless, like an unshakable mountain. "How did you do that? Are you really David?" Startled, Clark dared not exert any more force upwards, fearing he might hurt his brother, who suddenly seemed incredibly mysterious to him. "Listen, David, you can't kill him. Some lines, once crossed, are hard to retract. If your father and mother were here, they wouldn't approve of you doing this." Then, his expression turned serious. He stared into his brother's eyes and earnestly begged him to put the person down. Clark was now filled with regret for not having considered things more thoroughly. But he didn't want his brother to have to pay the price of murder to clean up the mess. "Think about what our fathers and mothers would think if they knew this, David." 1 second, 2 seconds, the two stared at each other. "Okay, we can spare his life." When his parents were mentioned, David seemed to soften his stance, and he put Jerome down. "However, I want to take a precaution just in case." Bang! After saying that, he slapped Jerome on the back of the head, but he didn't use much force. It felt like being hit hard on the back of the head with a baseball bat. Before he could react, Jerome fell straight onto the cold, hard road, his eyes closed and motionless. "Did you still kill him?" Clark quickly checked on the situation. Jerome was still breathing, but he couldn't wake him up no matter how he called. "I turned him into a vegetable in case he did something bad again." "What?" Hearing his brother's nonchalant words, Clark looked up in disbelief. "David, you... Are you suggesting that this is also vigilante justice, and that's unacceptable?" David immediately raised an eyebrow and asked a question in return. Clark honestly believes that's the case. To beat someone into a vegetative state to prevent retaliation is an extremely cruel approach. But considering that this incident was caused by his own negligence, and that his younger brother had listened to him and not killed the other party, should he still scold and reprimand his brother? Clark was speechless and unable to utter a word. "Let's leave it at that. Take him anywhere that can be treated and don't get involved in this anymore. David glanced at the newly formed vegetative state patient on the ground, then turned and left. Fear from Jerome plus 0.04, anger plus 0.03, hatred plus 0.004. A steady stream of emotional points is coming in. Sure enough, although a person in a vegetative state cannot wake up, their brain is still conscious. This would be better for him than killing Jerome. I dropped him off at the entrance of the town hospital. Carrying Jerome on his shoulder, Clark disappeared from the spot. A second or two later, David returned, his voice deep and muffled. Now we're going back to school, just in case someone finds out we're missing. David glanced at Clark, whose movements were only vaguely visible when he left, and said, "My strength and defense are definitely far superior to Clark's at this moment, but Clark has a significant advantage in speed." He was a little curious. If he didn't use kryptonite, he wondered who would win if he fought Clark now. "David, what's wrong with your health?" Catching up with his brother, Clark had a complicated expression and a series of questions to ask. David had suddenly revealed too much today, and he suddenly realized that he didn't seem to know his brother very well. Chapter 13 Don't Bite Me. Tall and thin like a praying mantis, with messy hair and round-framed glasses, Greg was considered a freak at school because of his hobby of collecting insects. He was timid and always avoided people's gaze. Even the school bully wouldn't want to bully someone who spends all his time hanging out with filthy insects. As night deepened, Greg, dressed in a black evening suit, returned home sullenly. He still didn't have the courage to attend the dance, and turned back just before reaching the school. Recently, he accidentally forgot to close one of the containers where his precious insects lived, and they stung his face with red spots while he was sleeping soundly at night. Page 15. He couldn't go to the ball looking like this, so that the person he dreamed of would see him. In the bright living room. Snapped. "Is this why you stay cooped up in your room all day, Greg?" When her son returned, Greg's mother looked grim and threw a stack of photos and several videotapes onto the sofa. The photos of Lana, her classmate, were taken from various angles, during the day, at night, and on her way home. It's as if they were taken by a pervert, and the content of the videotape is the same as the photos. "You cannot enter my room without my permission." Greg shouted angrily and hurriedly put away his treasured possessions in a panic. "How could you do this? I'm in the same club as Lana's aunt, Neil. My son is always secretly taking pictures of his niece. How am I supposed to face her?" As Greg's mother spoke, she became emotional and almost cried. "I can't let you continue like this." She was too negligent, too respectful of her son's privacy, and didn't pay enough attention to what he did, which led to her son becoming like this. He secretly photographed female classmates, spent all his time in his room raising insects, became increasingly gloomy, and stopped interacting with people. "I'm going to call Claremont Military Academy tomorrow morning." She couldn't imagine what her son would become if things continued like this. "Absolutely not. What will happen to my insects if I leave? You should have changed that weird habit a long time ago. I'll throw away all those bugs in your house tomorrow." She became even more agitated when she saw her son yelling at her without any restraint for those bugs. Bang! He hurried back to his room and slammed the door shut. As Greg looked at the butterflies, beetles, and spiders he had collected in the bottles and jars, his expression calmed down, and he spoke with an almost infatuated tone, as if he were talking to a lover. "You are so beautiful, no one can hurt you. I will take you to a safe place." The soil in the bottle, which provides habitat for insects, emits a beautiful pale green fluorescence. This is a meteorite he found at night some time ago. He broke it into pieces and added it to each bottle. It glows at night, making it even more beautiful. He also sent fluorescent butterflies as a gift to the person he had a crush on. I wonder what Lana's expression was like when she received the gift. It's a pity I didn't take a picture. After packing his things, Greg once again revealed that same fascination with insects. I packed all the bottles and jars in the house into the car, ready to go to the abandoned treehouse from my childhood to put the insects there. Moreover, he could hide up there and avoid being arrested and sent to military school. Click. Greek, where are you going? The dilapidated car started, and Greg sped onto the highway. Ignoring his mother's shouts as she chased after him, he sneered and headed straight for the treehouse from his childhood. But after driving for a short distance, just outside the town, the road came into a mud pit and became bumpy. Snapped. Due to inertia, the bottle containing numerous insects fell to the ground and shattered. Now free, insects carrying meteorite dust swarmed around the cramped car, attacking Greg who was driving. No, don't bite me. The sharp, needle-like pain was unbearable for Greek. He swerved the steering wheel and crashed into the roadside bushes. The green glowing insects were frantically biting him. Ah ah ah! Greg's screams echoed far and wide in the deserted countryside, eventually fading as he fell unconscious. The school auditorium was filled with a terrifying experience that left everyone weak in the knees and trembling. Everyone was still in shock and soaked to the bone, so the party could no longer continue. Someone called the police, and the town police quickly arrived to investigate. Upon hearing that the children had almost been attacked, the students' parents rushed over to take their children home. The quiet night was broken as ambulances, police cars, and vehicles driven by parents almost blocked the school gate. David, Clark, Jonathan and Martha arrived after receiving the news, but couldn't find their two sons in the crowd. Chloe, have you seen them? Martha asked the little girl who had visited her family's farm before and left a deep impression on her. I don't know, Aunt Martha. Accompanied by her father, Chloe, wrapped in a blanket, sat on the steps at the school gate and replied, they should be all right. Dad, Mom, we're here. The couple is looking, Clark shouted. Clark, where did you go? Chloe asked the question that had been bothering her for a while. David and I didn't have a dance partner. Halfway through the dance, we got bored and went outside for some fresh air. Clark and David walked over and saw Chloe and Pete's parents were there. Clark scratched the back of his head and said. He wasn't very good at lying and seemed a little nervous. But nobody thought much of it, many people were terrified tonight. Are you guys okay? After glancing at his youngest son's newly changed clothes, Jonathan patted his son on the shoulder and asked his two sons a question. I'm fine, Dad. David smiled at his concerned father, and Clark replied that he was fine. Jonathan glanced around and subtly signaled to his worried wife not to ask any more questions. The couple knew that the attacker had suddenly disappeared, and it was probably their eldest son who did it. Moreover, both sons were wearing clothes that should have been neatly folded and stored in the closet at home, indicating that they must have both encountered some kind of trouble. Are you Clark Kent and David Kent? Yes, sir. Where were you when it happened? Us. The town police routinely came over and took a statement, without suspecting Clark and David, who had left halfway through the process. Judging from the eyewitness testimonies of others, their physiques were vastly different from that guy's. Furthermore, it's still unclear whether this was an attack or a prank, so there's no need to make a big deal out of it for now. Judging from the fact that the other party scared everyone in the room half to death and then suddenly disappeared, it is most likely the latter. Unfortunately, tonight was supposed to be a wonderful evening for the children, Jonathan. It's good that the children are all right. The parents chatted for a bit, then each took their children home. So, it really wasn't a prank after all. At home, Jonathan and Martha sat on the sofa and looked at their two sons, asking them a question. A person who can generate electricity. The couple exchanged a surprised glance. Chapter 14 Gotham is not far from Metropolis. After hearing his two sons recount what had happened, David followed Clark after he took the man away, still worried. While crossing the school fence, he accidentally tore his clothes, and then he saw that Clark had already rendered the man incapacitated. "You did a great job, Clark, you saved your brother and everyone else." Jonathan pondered for a moment, then said seriously, "While we ask you to conceal your abilities, it doesn't mean you should stand idly by when someone is in trouble. We believe that God gave you these abilities for a reason." "God?" Clark, who was already feeling awkward and thought his brother didn't need him to save him, felt even more uncomfortable upon hearing this. "What's wrong?" Jonathan noticed that Clark's expression was a little off. "It's nothing, except that the madman who wanted to kill everyone at the ball also kept saying that God gave him his abilities." Page 16. David laughed. "When I say God, I mean heaven, not necessarily any particular one." Jonathan scratched his face. Neither he nor Martha were devout believers. "By the way, you finally subdued that guy. What happened to him?" He. Clark was speechless. How could he answer? He had previously asked his younger brother about his health, but his brother did not answer, saying he would tell him when they got home, but asked him to keep it a secret for now and not tell their parents. "Clark, you'll keep my secret, right?" He heard his brother's voice again. "Of course." That was his answer. He was pushed to the ground by Clark and became a vegetable, David said with a smile in the room. "What?" Jonathan and Martha were so surprised they almost jumped up from the sofa, quickly glancing at Clark who had just finished praising him. "Dad, Mom, you know that Clark has always been incredibly strong." David smiled and continued, "I don't think we can blame him." Clark felt the sentence structure was so familiar, and he remembered what he had said to Chloe and the other girl a few days ago when he was late for school. "You know, David has never really cared about me." "Clark, is that really true?" "Yes, it is." Seeing his parents looking at him with probing eyes, and having already promised to keep the secret, what else could Clark say? He gritted his teeth and agreed. "Clark, starting tomorrow, you will be secretly practicing controlling your power on the farm." Jonathan stood up abruptly, his expression turning serious, and he anxiously pressed down on his son's shoulder. "What if you accidentally kill someone next time you use a little more force?" "Well..." Faced with his father's worried yet firm words, Clark had no choice but to nod, unable to express his grievances. Jonathan and Martha are kind, but not pedantic. Clark was just careless. Most importantly, he was a murderer who wanted to massacre students, and he should have been sentenced to death. So he simply and repeatedly reminded Clark to practice controlling his strength and prepared to supervise him starting tomorrow. "You're despicable, David." Inside the warehouse, on the second-floor attic, Clark, having just escaped his parents' nagging, couldn't help but feel resentful for being blamed. Moreover, his younger brother is very vengeful. "Practicing strength training will not do you any harm." The sky was full of stars. Looking out the window, I crossed my arms and gazed at David in the distance, glancing at him. "Look at the way you faced that guy today, you looked like someone trying to help a hedgehog cross the street. Touching it is wrong, not touching it is wrong, I don't know where to start. I have always been able to control my strength at a level that is normal for an average person." That's true, otherwise, countless accidents would have occurred around Clark over the years. But what if the opponent is stronger than an ordinary person and you have to deal with them? Where are there so many people with superpowers that I need to deal with? Clark felt that David was deliberately using this as an excuse to give him something to do. The town they lived in was so small, and he never caused trouble, so it was impossible for him to be particularly unlucky. Every now and then, something would come up to him, and it was always related to superpowered people. David was speechless upon hearing this. The meteor shower brought by Clark has given rise to at least 7 or 8 superhumans, many of whom have become the subject of local legends. As for the rest, who knows how many there are? "David, can you tell me about your health now?" Looking around, Clark asked in a low voice. "Was it before, or recently?" David had been trying to change his clothes quickly to get back to school so no one would notice anything amiss, but now that he was home, he had no reason to refuse. "I was like this from birth," David replied. Now that he had demonstrated his abilities to Clark, he would no longer hide the truth about this physique. "Born?" Clark's eyes widened in disbelief. "Are you sure? How? I can't accept that you've so casually revealed your power over the past decade, while I've kept it well hidden." He glanced at Clark and retorted. "To be honest, it is a bit." Clark's emotions were complicated. Before he grew up, he also felt that this was a gift from God, and that he was stronger than anyone else. Thinking back to when he was a child, he was happy about this, while David, who was also naturally gifted, watched coldly from the sidelines. He felt extremely ashamed. "Are you really sure? I mean, how do you know you were born like this?" "Memory." David tapped his head with his finger. In fact, few people know that Thanos, the mad titan who struck fear into the hearts of the entire universe, dreamed of becoming a scientist when he was a child, and he did just that. He grew up on Titan, a planet with advanced technology, but without weapons or murder. Everything was perfectly harmonious. Until the birth of Thanos, a mutant of the Eternals, he embarked on the path of science in order to explore his own differences. The method of investigation was dissection, starting with dissecting small animals, then dissecting classmates, and finally dissecting his own mother who gave birth to him. Thanos can also be said to have a super brain. After leaving Titan, he became the number 2 on the space pirate ship with his technological knowledge alone, and began his journey to become the Dark Overlord. David and Clark weren't lying when they said they learned martial arts on TV. "You really can learn it just by watching. You must keep this a secret for me, Clark. After you used this to make me bear the blame for turning someone into a vegetable." Clark asked back with some resentment. "Clark, think about what I'll look like after I use my powers. Do you want your parents to worry?" David said. He planned to tell Jonathan and Martha about this after they had met more extraordinary people on Earth, at which point they would be much more receptive. And one Clark is enough to keep them worried all day long. Let them have a normal, carefree son for now. Clark's attitude softened when his parents were mentioned. "By the way, where did you learn how to beat someone into a vegetative state? Don't tell me you're on TV too." When this issue was brought up, his tone became very serious, and his eyes showed worry. The technique of precisely controlling the force to strike the back of a person's head and turning them into a vegetable is not shown on television, nor can it be mastered through mere practice. It requires repeated experimentation and practice. In other words, there may be more than one person who has been rendered into a vegetative state by their own younger brother. Gotham is not far from Metropolis. David turned and walked downstairs, leaving behind a single sentence. "In the past, when the school had long holidays, I would occasionally go there for a stroll. You know what the environment is like there. The people are honest and kind, but there are evil people everywhere. If you shoot 9 out of 10, there might be some who are innocent. If you shoot half of them, you might let a few go free. It's not difficult to find some villains who deserve to be shot 100 times to practice this move. He'll learn it in a few tries. I'm already tired of those plots where superheroes lock people up in jail, and then supervillains come out again and again." Page 17. He decided to do something for the world, such as creating some vegetative patients to provide him with some emotional support, and incidentally making the world a little quieter in the future. Gotham? The name of the place seemed to possess a demonic quality that inspired fear and led people astray. Upon hearing that his brother had been there, Clark paused for a moment, then his expression changed drastically. "I updated a little late, and wrote an extra 500 words. Chapter 15 Clark's Worries. The sky was as blue velvet. Bright sunshine shines down, and a gentle spring breeze stirs the cherry blossoms on campus. Cherry blossom petals fluttered down, creating a beautiful and colorful scene. Students came and went, carrying books, chatting in groups of 2 or 3. David and his friends walked through the school. Clark, who was standing next to him, had a worried look on his face and kept glancing at David. Just as parents are always afraid that their children will go astray, Clark believes that as the older brother, he also has a responsibility to prevent his younger brother from losing his innate kindness and becoming cold or even evil as he comes into contact with the world. Especially after discovering that David possessed power far exceeding that of ordinary people. Clark had been thinking about this all night, how to pull David back from the brink of darkness. To casually beat someone into a vegetative state without feeling any guilt is not just a little bit bad, it's a sign of things getting worse. That's what Clark thinks. He felt that his younger brother's thoughts and perceptions were already on the dangerous edge of a precipice. Taking another step would be the beginning of depravity, arbitrarily placing oneself above others. David was at a loss for words when he discovered that Clark was eager to find an angle to act as his mentor. Concern from Clark +6, +5, +7. However, starting yesterday, Clark suddenly increased the speed at which he raised his emotional threshold, as if he had been thinking about him since yesterday. At this rate, we may be able to complete the fusion soon and start the next template. There was an unexpected bonus. David was in a good mood. I wonder what the next template will be. Will it be weaker, comparable to the Thanos template, or even stronger? Step into the building. Why are they all looking at us? Students in the corridor occasionally cast curious and surprised glances at the group. Pete muttered to himself with self-admiration. Have they finally realized that being short doesn't diminish my charm? Save your breath, Pete. Chloe, engrossed in a newspaper, looked up and observed. They were clearly looking at Clark and David, but more at David. She was also a little confused as to why so many people were watching the two of them. David didn't have Clark's super hearing, but his exceptional senses allowed him to glean the reasons behind things from whispers. As the residents of this small town often say, in Smallville, a town that's not much bigger than a bottle cap, news spreads very quickly. For example, someone saw some of the most popular football team members from the town's high school in a bar and tried to bully them, but ended up getting beaten up instead. A look of helplessness flashed across Clark's face. He heard it too. The older brother, who only had a son, was being bullied and pinned to the ground. When the younger brother saw this, he swiftly and decisively took down several school bullies. Lana seems to be coming for you, Clark. Pete nudged his good friend Clark with his elbow. Get rid of that smug look on your face that screams, "Why am I a loser?" Was I really that obvious? Seeing the beautiful, gentle woman with black hair walking towards him at the end of the corridor, Clark coughed, muttered to himself, and secretly straightened his back. Having just had a big fight with her boyfriend, Lana looked heartbroken and hurriedly came over to apologize to Clark, her voice soft and slightly hoarse from crying. I'm sorry, Clark. I didn't know Whitney was so naive as to cause trouble for you just because I said a couple of words to you. Upon learning of the rumors circulating on campus, she immediately went to Whitney to verify them, hoping to get confirmation from her boyfriend that it was just a rumor. But Whitney, feeling deeply ashamed, angrily admitted, with a hint of reproach, that it was Lana's subtle display of a different attitude towards Clark that made him unable to contain his anger and thus went to find Clark. I'm actually fine, Lana. Clark laughed. Don't blame Whitney. I can't accept that he lied to me. He was the one who deliberately caused trouble for you and lost the necklace I gave him. Lana became even more upset when the topic came up, her eyes reddening and her voice low. It is said that someone got drunk and provoked us at the bar. I think I need to re-examine my relationship with Whitney. Seeing Lana's sad and mournful appearance, Clark, who had never encountered such a situation before, scratched the back of his head, flustered and unsure how to comfort her, only able to repeatedly tell Lana not to cry. I bumped into Whitney at the bar, maybe he was drunk when he acted so irrationally. Clark, Do you want to hear what you're saying? You'd even defend your rival if it meant the person you secretly love would feel better? David shook his head inwardly, feeling that he was beyond saving. Even without kryptonite, given Clark's current personality, he would never be able to catch up with this cheerleader. David. Clark subtly winked at David, urging him to return the meteorite necklace, which held great significance for Lana, as they had agreed yesterday. With the necklace recovered, perhaps Lana will no longer be sad. David, I'm sorry. Remembering something, Lana wiped away her tears and turned to David earnestly. Because of me, Whitney has caused you trouble. Fine. He didn't think it was a problem. David spoke casually as he pulled the necklace out of his pocket and handed it to her. This is your necklace. Clark found it that day and asked me to keep it. Clark really wanted to personally hand the necklace over to Lana. But he felt that if he didn't want to take out the necklace and then perform a dramatic fall on the spot, lying on the ground for a long time and unable to get up, making a huge fool of himself again, it would be best to let David pass it on. My necklace. As Lana took the necklace, a look of surprise appeared in her eyes, and a smile spread across her tear-streaked face. Thank you, David, and Clark. She seemed to have misunderstood something. If Clark found it, why didn't he return it to her himself? Lana thought David wanted to match her with her brother Clark. Seeing that David's attitude towards her was indifferent, unlike others on campus who would look away after handing over the necklace, leaving Clark space to talk to her. For some reason, she found herself glancing at David a couple more times. He doesn't usually participate in any sports, just like Clark. Occasionally, you might see him sitting in a corner of the campus with a book in his hand. He's very tall, but doesn't have any explosively visible muscles. How did he manage to beat Whitney and his teammates? Clark, who had been intently watching the goddess, not missing a single smile or frown, glanced at Lana and then at his younger brother. My heart skipped a beat. Why did I have a bad feeling about this? Deng deng. Suddenly, footsteps echoed around the corner of the corridor. Lana. Whitney, furious and angry, regretted it and realized he shouldn't have acted that way. He looked nervous and tried to catch up with his girlfriend to win her back. David, Clark, I'm leaving now. Lana didn't want to see him at that moment. Her expression changed, and she greeted Chloe and Pete again before hurriedly turning and leaving. Whitney, who caught up with him, saw David as she passed by, her face showing unease, and she left with shame and anger in her eyes. David didn't care at all. There's a staircase corner next to it. A figure coldly and secretly observed everything, the gaze of some cold-blooded creature shifting between David and Clark. Page 18. Chapter 16. Insects in a hurry to find a mating. Is someone watching me? David seemed to sense something and looked over, and the others also turned to look. A man wearing a black jacket and with slicked-back blonde hair, his face cold and aloof, like a cold-blooded hunter at the top of the food chain, seemed to have no regard for the four of them. He turned and walked away in the direction Lana had left. Was that cool guy Greg just now? Several seconds after the person had passed by, Pete turned around, looking completely bewildered. It took me a few seconds to recognize him, Chloe said, her eyes also showing shock. She had previously commissioned articles from Greek, publishing some popular science articles about insects in the Torch newspaper, which she edited. But he was completely different from the Greg she had known before, who was so shy that he wouldn't even look girls in the eye. It's not just that he took off his glasses and changed his clothes, his whole person has changed. Chloe rubbed her arms suspiciously. He gave me goosebumps. It's not embarrassment, not shyness, but an instinctive discomfort, like a deer encountering a hyena, its body instinctively warning it to stay away. David and Clark, on the other hand, didn't have Chloe's vibe at all. The four continued chatting as they walked toward the classroom. Chloe flicked the newspaper and then brought up another strange thing she had seen in it. Look at this, Jeremy Carey, who was also a student at our high school more than a decade ago. He was found unconscious after the meteor shower, went missing at the state hospital after a medical equipment malfunction, and was found yesterday in front of our town hospital. It sounds like someone stole a person in a vegetative state from the hospital and then abandoned him at our hospital gate. Pete wondered, what would be the benefit of doing such a thing? David and Clark exchanged a glance, the latter seemed slightly nervous. I'm going to stick it on my weird wall. In the activities editorial department that Chloe was assigned to by the school, there was a strange wall that recorded all sorts of bizarre things. Well, this isn't anything special, is it? Clark said somewhat guiltily. Interestingly, after this incident, doctors discovered that this previously unnoticed person in a vegetative state seemed to have not aged at all over the past 10 years, for reasons unknown. As they spoke, they arrived at the editorial department, opened the storage room inside, and Chloe pasted the newspaper on the wall. The entire wall was covered with similar newspapers and debris, all about strange events caused by meteorites. There's a magazine cover on it. It's Lana. A look of sadness flashed across Clark's eyes. The cover features a young Lana wearing an adorable pink princess dress and holding a fairy wand, dressed as if she's waiting for her parents to take her to the amusement park. But he looked as if he had just experienced a disaster, he was covered in dirt and his expression was one of grief as he wailed. Magazine title, After the Meteor Shower, Heartbroken Angels. More than a decade ago, a meteor shower caused a disaster that killed several people, including Lana's parents. Clark noticed Lana because of this incident, and after secretly watching her many times, he developed some different feelings for her. Insects, arthropods among invertebrates, are the most numerous group of animals on our planet. For example, cockroaches, ants, bees. Classmates, don't look down on these small animals. Insects have enormous potential and can easily do many things that seem incredible to us humans. However, most of them have short lifespans, like shooting stars, and don't live past the end of summer. Therefore, once insects become adults, driven by strong genetic instincts, they generally begin to quickly seek mates and court each other, doing everything possible to defeat competitors and produce offspring. A day of school life passed in the blink of an eye, after a boring biology class. When school ended in the afternoon. As dusk began to set on the horizon, David, Clark, and a few others walked out of the school gate. At the school gate, Greg, who had been expressionless at noon, was now smiling and talking to Lana, who looked exhausted. Lana, you look like you're in a bad mood. I heard there's a nice coffee shop in town, would you like to come and sit together? He waved the homework in his hand. I would like to ask you to tutor me on my literature report. Greek, I told you at noon that I really like the butterfly you gave me. But I'm not in the mood to accept the invitation right now. Could you give me some time to calm down? Desperate to win back his girlfriend, Whitney relentlessly pursued her on campus, but this only led Lana to formally suggest a break for a while. Having just experienced the failure of a relationship, she was exhausted both physically and mentally. Okay, okay. Greg's smile became somewhat stiff. Lana nodded to David and Clark as a greeting, then turned and left wearily, clutching her books. Although Greg has changed his appearance, he still doesn't know how to interact with girls. Chloe shook her head, a playful look on her face. Dude, I don't think what you should be doing right now is just standing here. Pete patted Clark on the shoulder and winked. What a rare opportunity this is. David, Clark's eyes lit up as he realized what was happening, and he said apologetically, please tell my parents that I'll be home later. David crossed his arms, his expression showing no surprise, and walked past him as he spoke. If you encounter some thugs on your way home with a girl, I advise you to protect yourself first, Clark. Lana put the kryptonite necklace back on. If some melodramatic scene were to happen where someone jumps out and harasses Lana, Clark, in his bravado, would likely be the first one to fall. If a future Superman, the leader of the Justice League, were to try to save a damsel in distress in high school and get beaten to death by thugs in an alley, that would be a joke. I know. Having almost gotten used to his brother's sarcastic reminders, Clark reluctantly ran after Lana. David and the two men boarded the school bus and left. If you don't want to end up in the trash can, you insect freak. At the school gate, Greg watched indifferently as Clark chased after Lana, lost in thought. Suddenly someone patted him hard on the shoulder and threatened him in a low voice. Just stay away from my girlfriend. Whitney threw out a threatening remark and then went to chase after Clark to give him another warning. But suddenly a strong hand grabbed his shoulder, preventing him from moving forward. A losing competitor should at least be prepared for failure. Greg's hands were like a hydraulic press, squeezing Whitney's bones so hard they cracked and splintered. He was in pain and furious, and turned to elbow him in the face. Let me go. You're out of the game, Whitney. His cold, emotionless words, spoken by a cold-blooded creature devoid of feeling, were preceded by his actions. With a flick of his wrist, Whitney was flung away like a weightless plush toy, crashing into a trash can at the school gate and falling unconscious in a disheveled state. Ignoring the screams of others, Greg glanced expressionlessly at Clark, who had caught up with Lana and was trying to speak, then looked at the departing school bus. I will be the one who wins the title of spouse in the end. He turned and left. Chapter 17 Clark's Dream and Luther. David, Clark, we're going to sell fruit at the market on the outskirts of town today. You'll need to help load the truck later. On this rare holiday, my mother's voice came from downstairs. The wooden stairs beneath his feet seemed to echo his mother's voice as he descended, and David casually recalled yesterday's events. Greek, whose appearance has drastically changed at school, also seems to have undergone a genetic mutation. His heart rate is much slower than normal. However, there are quite a few people with genetic mutations in this town, so as long as you don't provoke him, it's fine. Page 19. Sitting at the dining table, Jonathan ate his breakfast of cereal soaked in milk. David doesn't like cereal, he eats warm bread and spreads blueberry jam on it with a knife. Clark? Martha called upstairs again when she saw that her eldest son hadn't come down yet. Bang! A dull thud came from upstairs, accompanied by a sound like wood breaking. When did Clark start having morning grumpiness? Jonathan paused for a moment, then said. The sound suggests that something was destroyed by Clark. Are you all right, Clark? Knowing her husband was just joking, Martha called upstairs. I'm fine, Mother, I'll be right down, it's just. Upstairs, Clark's voice sounded somewhat flustered. A moment later, he sat down at the dining table with a look of disbelief, like a child who had done something wrong and was feeling embarrassed. The bed in my room needs to be repaired. Your bed is broken? What happened? A hint of doubt appeared in Jonathan's eyes. Adolescence is a time of rapid physical development. Could it be that the son's strength has increased again and he can no longer control it? I just woke up and found myself floating in mid-air. After being startled, I fell down and broke the bed leg. Clark frowned, his expression showing slight resistance. How can a person fly? He suddenly developed an ability different from ordinary people, which made him feel very uneasy. It reminded him once again that he was an alien and did not belong to this family. And what if something uncontrollable happens to him next? Float. From super strength and super defense to super speed, even the couple, who were already experienced with such things, were not without surprise. From ancient times to the present, flying has always been a dream of humankind. The perceptive Martha noticed his emotions, took her son's hand, and said gently, Clark, no matter how many extraordinary talents you have, you are still our son. Since it's a talent you were born with, you can master it, son. Jonathan's tone was serious, trying to give his son confidence. Don't be afraid. You're not the only one in the world who can fly. Countless birds also enjoy the sky freely. David wasn't surprised that the young Superman seemed to be awakening his ability to fly. I thought it was something else. What? Clark couldn't help but ask. It's nothing. When I got up, I heard some noises next door, like someone talking in their sleep and repeatedly calling out someone's name. David swallowed the bread in his mouth, his casual tone making Clark at the table extremely embarrassed. Because in his dream before waking up, he was also flying, all the way to Lana's house, onto her bed, floating and admiring Lana's beautiful sleeping posture. He swore he hadn't done anything before he was woken up, but the dream was undeniably somewhat erotic. I actually read it aloud. It must be because I had a long, unusual conversation with Lana on my way home from school yesterday, trying to comfort her, that I dreamt about her last night. Someone's name? Martha asked in confusion. Clark, did you have a nightmare? She remembered the last time Clark almost got beaten up by Whitney. It's nothing, Mother. It's getting late, let's hurry up and finish breakfast, load the car, and head to the market. Clark's face flushed red, and he coughed twice from choking on his milk. Feeling guilty, he changed the subject. Otherwise, you won't be able to get a good spot. After finishing their meal, they arrived at the farm gate where Clark and David carried boxes of fruit out of the warehouse. The fruit, weighing dozens of kilograms, felt as light as a feather in Clark's hands. He effortlessly and quickly loaded box after box onto the pickup truck. But when he turned around, he saw David only putting the second box on the car after he had moved 7 or 8 boxes, leisurely as if he were on a spring outing. Can you hurry up? He couldn't help but say. Clark, your brother doesn't have your strength, don't push him, Martha gently scolded. He has no strength. Clark opened his mouth, remembering how he hadn't been able to pry David's hand off with both of his own. Although there was a reason he didn't dare to use his full strength. For a long time, he has been almost like a human tractor, a fence pile driver, and a plow on his family farm, saving the farm a lot of expenses. Clark didn't think much of it, he was happy to share the burden with his aging parents who had raised him. But after discovering that David was also incredibly strong, he became very unhappy when he remembered how David had just been watching him work leisurely in the past. In particular, David is currently enjoying his leisure time while slacking off. What's most infuriating is that he can't tell his parents. Clark's frustration +4, +3. David remained unmoved by Clark's resentful gaze and only loaded the last box of fruit onto the truck after Clark had moved 7 or 8 more boxes. He got into the pickup truck. It's a bit crowded. It's inconvenient for Father to drive, so you can sit in the back. Clark was about to come up after finishing his work when David waved him away. The pickup truck has only 1 row of seats in the front, which is just right for 3 people, but a bit cramped for 4. Why not you? Clark, who was stopped, stared wide-eyed. It's not right for the older brother to take the younger brother's seat. David glanced at him, his tone puzzled. You? Seeing his matter-of-fact manner, and not at all like a younger brother, Clark gritted his teeth, took a deep breath, and helplessly turned to the back. Jonathan and Martha were a little confused. In the past, when this happened occasionally, Clark would always rush to the back first, afraid that David would fall from behind and get hurt. What's wrong with the 2 brothers today? Did they have a fight? Laugh. Turn the key, and the car starts. In the back of the car, the future Superman Clark sat in the back, looking slightly annoyed, holding a basket of apples. We arrived at the market. The Kent family found a spot near the center, set up their tent, and laid out boxes of sweet and tempting fresh fruit. Clark used his thumb to force the nail into the stake and hung up a sign that read "Fresh fruit from Kent Farms." Aren't you afraid of being seen using your abilities secretly like this? Sitting in his stall, David looked up. Located in the suburbs, this place is a great spot for a spring outing. As a result, a temporary market made up of tents has sprung up. On the green grass, there are various stalls selling flowers, hot dogs, fruits, etc., and people come and go, making it very lively. In terms of concealment, I am indeed inferior to you. Clark, who had deliberately observed that no one was paying attention before secretly using his abilities, sat down next to him and watched the stall together. My parents and I didn't even notice all these years. Clark, I didn't expect to see you here. Suddenly, a clear voice carrying a smile came from inside. The two looked up and David saw a bald head that shone like a light bulb in the sunlight. Luther. Chapter 18 Halfway Attack. Luther. Page 20. Call me Lex. You saved my life, Clark. Lex Luthor was dressed in an expensive silver grey suit. He looked young and had an elite and capable demeanor. Only a hint of the frivolity and arrogance of a rich second generation remained between his brows. At this time, he was not yet the cold and steady billionaire and ambitious man he would become in the future. Even if you refuse my gift, I don't want you to become too distant. Clark readily agreed and chuckled. What are you doing here, Lex? He felt a certain fondness for Lex, who had given him a pickup truck as a thank you gift. Why can't I be here? Do you think I should spend all my time in nightclubs, luxury stores, and sports car dealerships, constantly spending money like water and partying? Lex Luthor asked in a humorous reply. Stop joking, Clark. Can't I go for a walk if I'm feeling a little down? Even a billionaire's heir can come to the countryside for a stroll like an ordinary person, wander around the market, buy some hot dogs and fruit, and try to cheer himself up. David raised an eyebrow and said calmly. Isn't the vast, green golf course of the metropolitan area enough to relieve your boredom? Taking a walk in the countryside, we bumped into each other by chance and had a pleasant conversation. How delightful! Clark had a vague feeling that his younger brother didn't seem to like Lex Luthor, and he was a little puzzled. But he felt a little guilty towards Luthor, in addition to some goodwill towards him. When he returned the pickup truck to Luthor Manor last time, he chatted with Lex Luthor for a few minutes. When asked about Lex Luthor's baldness, he said it was because more than 10 years ago, his father brought him to this small town to inspect a fertilizer plant, where they encountered a meteor shower. After being exposed to the radiation from the meteor shower, he lost all his hair. Although I was scorned by my father and ostracized by my classmates who thought I was a freak because of this, it doesn't matter. It taught me a lot, such as how being alone helps with thinking. Cattle and sheep travel in herds, while wild beasts often roam alone. Clark still remembered Luthor's words, which, though spoken with a nonchalant and contemptuous air, clearly showed that he hadn't completely let go of the past. Who is this? My brother, David, Clark introduced. Your brother? Hello, David. Luthor glanced at David, greeted him, and sighed with a gloomy expression. The golf club in the metropolitan area is great, but I don't want to go back there for the time being. Before I escape being the laughingstock of everyone. What's wrong, Lex? My father believed that the offspring of lions should be brave and diligent. He spoke with a self-deprecating tone. Perhaps because I had reached an age where I had not yet produced any results that would satisfy him, he exiled me to this small town to manage the town's fertilizer plant. The Luthor Group's assets are spread throughout the United States, especially in metropolitan areas where its presence can be seen in almost every aspect of life, from food and clothing to housing and transportation. This is not the way to cultivate a successor for a large corporation. Instead, they should be transferred away from the core of the corporation, which is fraught with complex affairs, and put in charge of a small fertilizer plant in a remote town. Many people in the upper echelons of the metropolis have heard how spoiled the Luthor family's son has been since childhood. His father had spent enough money to build several newspapers and prisons from scratch to keep him out of the news and jail for those deeds. Now, realizing he was hopeless, the shrewd and cold-blooded old bat, Lionel Luthor, finally gave up on him. If you manage the fertilizer plant well, your father will probably let you go back sooner or later. When Luther mentioned his childhood experience of being neglected and exiled by his father, Clark's expression shifted slightly, and he offered words of comfort. "I heard that your father only has one son, you. Perhaps, but I think it's better to run a fertilizer plant whose potential is already predictable. Why not start a new track?" Luther composed himself and smiled. Modern car glass originated from a failed chemical experiment, and Coca-Cola, found all over the world, can be traced back to a doctor's attempt to create a headache-relieving syrup. "Clark, David, do you know how many huge business opportunities started out as inconspicuous, like seeds buried in the soil, but were later discovered, watered and nurtured by those with a keen eye, and grew into towering trees that countless people look up to?" He spoke eloquently to the two of them, as if he were recounting his ambitions and goals. "So you came to the countryside to look for seeds?" Clark joked. "Have you found the seed, Luther?" David also said something, slowly. "Not yet, but whatever you're looking for, the most important thing is patience, isn't it?" Their eyes met, and Luther chuckled suavely. It must be said that, putting aside his unknown spoiled brat deeds, Luther received a good upbringing from a young age. His manners and demeanor were refined, making people feel comfortable and leaving a good impression on them. They could have a pleasant conversation with him. "Oh? Really?" A cold glint flashed in David's eyes. He felt that Luther believed he had found the seed and was now in the process of digging it up. "That seed is the one who was hit head-on by an out-of-control sports car traveling at over 200 miles per hour, crashed through the concrete railing of a bridge, and plunged into the river, yet remained unharmed." Clark. "Today might just be the beginning of their investigation. Clark, David, you need to go back and get some more fruit." Jonathan and Martha returned with joy on their faces after successfully closing a deal. "A customer who is throwing a party has taken a liking to our fresh fruit, but we don't have enough fruit right now." David and Clark stood up, and Clark introduced Luther to his parents. "Mr. Kent, Mrs. Kent, it's a pleasure to meet you." Lex Luthor extended his hand in a friendly and warm manner. Jonathan paused, shook his hand politely, and then turned to his two sons. "You need to hurry up, don't keep the customers waiting." He didn't seem to want to talk to Lex Luthor at all. Luthor still wore a bright smile that revealed his white teeth, but it seemed to have become slightly stiff. "Okay, father." David smiled, agreed to Clark's request, and left. "It seems my father doesn't like Lex Luthor." On the way out of the market, Clark asked in confusion. "My father's animosity toward the Luthor family has a long history. Before the Luthor Group acquired a large amount of land through various means and built the fertilizer plant, the river flowing through the town near the plant hadn't yet turned green, grass still grew along its banks, and the soil wasn't yet grayish-black and smelly." David sneered. "Now, an indelible scar has appeared on the map of the town. But that wasn't Lex's fault." Clark felt he couldn't implicate Lex, who couldn't even do elementary arithmetic at the time. "Hi, Clark, David." As the two chatted and were about to drive away from the market, they suddenly bumped into Chloe and Pete, who were also out for a spring outing. The two waved happily and came over. Who wouldn't love to go for a walk in the spring, on a sunny day with such fresh air? Chloe took a deep breath, feeling very happy. After a few words, Pete seemed to suddenly remember something. "By the way, have you seen Greg?" "No, what happened?" "You might not believe it, but yesterday Grecker knocked Whitney unconscious at the school gate and she ended up in the hospital. Police arrived at the house and found Greek's mother murdered, her body wrapped in a spider web-like substance, while Greek was missing." He looked around and lowered his voice, making the atmosphere suddenly strange. "You mean, Greek killed his own mother?" Clark frowned, incredulous. "Would anyone kill their own mother? Generally speaking, that's impossible, that's what the police suspect." Chloe shrugged. "Maybe his appearance has changed drastically because he has a mental illness, then it's no longer impossible. Anyway, if you run into Greg, be careful.